Ready to go? Is that a yes?
Yes, staff are ready to go.
Okay, great, thanks. So good afternoon. Welcome to the special council meeting of March 31st, 2022. Of course, we acknowledge we're on the unceded traditional homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and thank them for having care for this land. I look forward to working with them in partnership as we grow this great city together. And thanks to staff who have been doing an extraordinary job, which we've come to expect. So thanks very much for all the work that you do. We have the roll call, please.
Mayor Stewart in the chair. Councillor Carr. Councillor DeGenova? Not here. Councillor Fry.
Here.
Councillor Swanson.
Here.
Councillor Hardwick.
Present.
Councillor Wiebe.
Present.
Councillor Boyle.
Present.
Councillor Dominato.
Present.
Councillor Bly. Not here. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Present.
You have quorum, Mayor Stewart.
Thanks very much. Council, before we start the special meeting, I just want to acknowledge that today is the Transgender Day of Visibility. March 31st is the Transgender Day of Disability, and today we acknowledge the many contributions of transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit people, and the great contributions they make to this city. And I think I can speak for all of us when we say we stand with you and support you today and every day. So to recognize this day, we'll be illuminating City Hall tonight in blue, pink, and white in recognition of Transgender Day of Visibility. Moving on to today's meeting, this special council meeting has been called in accordance with section 14.5 of the procedure bylaw. The purpose of the meeting is to provide council with an overview of the preliminary draft of the 2023 to 2026 capital plan and have an opportunity for council to input into this. Council, our input will be incorporated in the subsequent draft capital plan that will be brought back to council on April 26th. A memo from Deputy City Manager Karen Levitt has been circulated to council and is posted on the city's agenda webpage. This is a public meeting, so folks will be watching or can come to the council chambers. This memo includes an overview of the proceedings for today. Midway through the staff presentations, staff suggests we pause for a round of questions before continuing with the remaining staff presentations to council. That time, council may also consider a second round of questions, which staff suggests occur after the conclusion of the staff presentations at the continuation of this meeting on April 7th. So hear a bunch of presentations, have a round of questions, hear a bunch more presentations, have another round of questions. Seems to be the approach here, although we can alter on the way if you like. The memo further suggests that council recess the meeting today by 7 p.m. and continue the meeting next Thursday, April 7th at 3 p.m. with the remaining staff presentations, questions to staff, and council discussion. And you don't have to keep that all in your heads. I'll just give you options as we move through the meeting. Please note there'll be no public speakers at today's special council meeting. There'll be no public speakers at this meeting or when the meeting reconvenes. Members of the public may send comments to council by using the online web form listed on the meeting agenda webpage. Council may view these proceedings online or attend in person at City Hall. Robust public engagement will begin in May to gather the public's feedback on the draft capital plan. Speakers will have an opportunity to address council on the draft at the council meeting on April 26th. So these next two meetings are really for our input and for the public to kind of get a brief preview of what's to come. Then there'll be a round of public consultations, and then we'll have a public meeting on April 26th with the final 2023-2026 capital plan decided at the council meeting on July 6th. So quite a long runway here to our final decision. Council, I suggest we might want to extend this meeting past 5 p.m. to allow for questions to staff and staff presentations and recess at or before 6 p.m. So although we're scheduled to 7, if we decide to go through dinner, we could conclude at 6. So is someone like to move that motion now to set the time frame for this meeting?
Can
Thanks,
I
Councillor.
move that we continue until 6 p.m. and recess? I assume is the correct word, at 6 p.m.
Yep.
until next week. Great.
Great, thank you. Do you have a seconder?
Second,
Councillor Carr.
Yeah.
Okay, I heard Councillor Kirby-Young first. All in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Great. Okay, so this meeting will conclude at 6. So a few reminders before we begin. The public can follow along on Twitter at Van City Clerk for updates on the progress of the meeting. We of course have a longstanding commitment to equity, gender diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders, which is I think especially important today. So remind council then when addressing staff, please avoid using gendered honorifics, and we can refer to folks by their first and last name, role, or title. Okay, so we have Paul Mokry, the city manager, who will provide an introduction and overview of today's workshop, and that should be around 20 minutes or less. So we'll turn it over to the city manager.
Comes on. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Council. As the Mayor just shared with us, the purpose of these, it's really a single workshop that's spread out over 2 days, is to provide Council the opportunity for you to have an in-depth conversation about the development of the 23 to 26 draft capital plan. You can see behind me we've got a number of members of your city leadership team and some of their staff here to answer questions when we get to that part of the discussion. We also have on WebEx the critical finance team and team from our planning department that's been developing this plan. I'm just going to read out their names so you know they're there. They'll also be available to answer questions when we get to that. So we have Grace Chang, Rob Evans, Michelle Desrochers, David Usugi, and Jonathan Ainsworth, all on the line. And they've been really a lot of the engine behind developing the plan that you have before you today. So I'm just going to quickly run through the format of these 2 meetings. The Mayor at a high level just shared this with us. Paul Mokry, our city manager, is going to share an introduction with us, and then we're going to hear from Teresa O'Donnell, our general manager of planning, urban design, and sustainability, about the intersect between the capital plan and the city building work that our planning department does. Then Patrice Impey, our General Manager of Finance, Risk and Supply Chain Management, is going to give us an overview of the draft capital plan you have before you today. And then, as the Mayor said, we're going to pause and allow Council to ask a round of questions. If you want to ask a second round of questions, that would bump our item number 5 there to April 7th. Once we finish with the Council's questions, we are going to have our general managers each present their respective service category, an overview of what's in the preliminary plan right now, what isn't in the plan, and what's been achieved in the last 4 years in that service category. We will break at the end of this meeting and reconvene this meeting on April 7th, and we will carry on with those presentations from the general managers. We won't get through them all today. And then we'll spend some time responding to Council's questions about the large one-off projects, some of which are in the preliminary draft plan. Some of them aren't in there right now, and give Council a chance to, again, have a discussion among yourselves and ask the staff questions about that. And then the rest of the meeting, however long it takes, will be devoted to Council, again, having your own discussion about this and asking staff questions. So that's the plan as laid out. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Paul, who's going to share with you an introduction about the plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karen. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Nice to see you here and there. So this is this workshop with you over these next 2 days is a process that we've not conducted in the past. So it's a bit of an experiment in that regard. But we've clearly heard from you, Council, of your interest in being engaged in the development of this plan. As you'll hear, it's a very complex exercise. We're actually working on the plan in parallel with this. So, and you've heard that from us. So a lot of the information that you've received has evolved very recently and will continue to. As was discussed, this is a preliminary draft plan, so it's not baked in any respect. It's indicative, certainly, of the direction that staff are recommending, but there's more work that we have to do, and of course, opportunities for you to provide input that I'll speak more about. So in terms of the capital planning process, so what we are talking about here is a resource allocation exercise. And it's critical, of course, to building the city as well and service delivery. So this is core to what the city does. and the services that we provide to the residents. It is, as indicated there, a matter of allocating scarce resources. So there are trade-offs that staff have been working through and that you as council ultimately will be called upon to determine. You'll hear a lot from the public, from other city bodies that provide input to you on on issues around service delivery and capital infrastructure, and we'll do our best to help you navigate all of that. This, compared to the operating budget, the capital planning process is orders of magnitude more complex, both in terms of the time dimensions, so we're talking about a 4-year, multi-year plan, but as well as a number of these other dimensions I'll walk through here quickly. So first of all, we have to take into account existing capital programs. So there is work in progress that will continue from this capital plan to the next. So that obviously informs the next 4-year cycle. We have a range of directions from council, some long-standing, some imposed or implemented by this council, community plans, long-term strategic plans, resolutions, motions passed more recently by this council regarding the capital planning process, specifically relating to climate, facility renewal, and infrastructure renewal and housing. We have to navigate the extent to which, or anticipate the extent to which third parties are contributing to this. So we do receive money from senior orders of government, as you know, and TransLink, for example. And then funding source restrictions, and that's a really key one. Again, unlike the operating budget, there are much greater restrictions on our ability to move money around within the capital plan, and Patrice and her team will talk about it as we go forward. But all of that adds to, as I said, orders of magnitude more complexity than the typical operating budget process that we go through every year. I think this process too is critical. You as council approve every year a capital budget as part of your annual budget approval process that we go through. But this 4-year plan is essential for us, obviously, to be able to deliver on the types of projects that we're talking about here. It's not feasible that we would be doing that planning year to year. And again, anticipating and managing the funding envelopes that we work with, that multi-dimensional or multi-year planning program is critical. In terms of the process itself and your inputs to this, there are 3 touch points that are contemplated right now. So these workshops that we're now embarking on today and on April 7th, we will be coming back to you on April 26th with a draft plan for purposes of engaging with the public. So you will see a refined version of the plan at that point in time. And then the final plan will come back, or the plan will come back for final approval on July the 6th. So all 3 of those obviously are points of time for you to ask questions of staff and also to provide direction. I would suggest that at this point, specific direction is not really what we're contemplating at this point. We are early in this process, it's ongoing. Suggest that specific motions or direction are probably more applicable or appropriate at either in April or July. But we did want to conduct this discussion with you in a formal council setting so that you have full range of kind of discretion in being able to provide us direction should you choose to do that. So the purpose of these workshops is to give you a kind of an relatively early, in-depth kind of insight into what's included in the draft 23 to 26 plan that staff are developing, to ask questions of us as staff and the general managers responsible for the various services and asset classes around the allocation of capital that we're proposing within the plan. We'll do our best to give you insight into what the trade-offs are and where there's opportunity for where there are opportunities for trade-offs within the plan. And also it's an opportunity for you to direct us on any particular trade-offs that you think we should be engaging the public specifically on when this plan does go out for public engagement at the end of the month. The way the plan is organized, and this presentation over the next, this session and on April 7th is organized, is around service categories or asset classes. And there's 12 different classes that you'll see there listed. And then within each, so for example, community facilities, there's a number of different asset types or serviced facility types that are included there. So this is essentially the structure that we'll be presenting the plan to you in. Council does, of course, have other cross-cutting policy objectives like climate resilience, for example. Housing affordability is a little bit more specific in that we have an affordable housing category. But infrastructure and facility renewal is another kind of priority or policy objective you've articulated to us that cuts across these categories. And so again, those are issues that we'll have to talk about as we go through how each of those, the broader cross-cutting objectives are identified or addressed in the specific service categories and the plans for those. In terms of the discretion, so there are, as I mentioned, areas of the plan where there is less discretion, certainly for staff and for council as well, to be frank. We have a number of programs and projects that have commenced under the current plan that we're in now, 2019 to 2022, that will continue and will require funding to complete in the next plan. We also have a range of standing or established kind of annual capital programs that relate to asset renewal, for example, where there really isn't an option to spend the money. These are assets that we need to maintain. Deferral of that maintenance either pushes expense into future years in a way that's unwise or potentially creates other safety risks. So in some of those cases, we don't really have a lot of option. But there are also, there is certainly room, though, for discretion and for council to provide direction on either specific projects that are in and out, particularly large projects, or expansion of particular programs, maybe beyond what has been the case in the past or what's contemplated in the staff draft. The plan is constrained ultimately by funding. So we're working with a funding envelope that we're projecting over the 4 years. And the size of the capital plan does have a direct impact on the city's operating budget. So as you may recall, since 2019, in each of our operating budgets since that year, there's been roughly 1% of the property tax increase has been specifically allocated to infrastructure renewal. So you as council have made a very significant commitment over your term, I would say, to not only maintain our infrastructure at a historical rate, but actually to provide more capacity for that. And as you hear from Patrice, we do have a significant infrastructure deficit that will continue to drive the need for increased renewal rates beyond where we are today. But that's a really significant, those are very significant decisions that this council has made. And we're recommending that pattern be continued into the future. So essentially a 1% property tax increase per year, specifically to address our infrastructure deficit. On the development side, which is the other major source of capital funding for the city, there's a constraint on that. And both in terms of the amount of development activity that's going on within the city and the amount of funding that development can provide for public amenities. There is a point at which those charges become uneconomical and we actually start to limit development and housing production in particular. And then senior governments, of course, we continue our advocacy. Council, you continue your advocacy with senior governments for infrastructure funding, but there's limits to those funding sources as well. So what that means is within that envelope, this is a process that involves trade-offs. We will be presenting in the course of the next 6 hours our preliminary draft, which includes a set of trade-off decisions that we've made based on direction that we've heard from you over the course of your term. We will also be identifying elements that may be of interest to either the public, to council, to other public bodies that are currently outside the funding envelope of the plan as we've articulated it. Development costs levy, that's a key funding source. And the allocation of development cost levies is another key decision that council will make that provides funding source for the assets that we're talking about here. So there will be an update coming to you. That's an explicit or specific decision that you'll be making around allocation of DCLs, but that flows back into then the amount of money that's available within each asset class within the capital plan. The current, just want to make sure that we haven't lost, okay, it's just delay. Yeah, sorry, I want to make sure that we hadn't lost the slides. So this is a graphic, council, that you've seen before within the annual budgeting process and really breaks down the current capital plan, 2019 to 2022, based on both the distinction between renewal of existing infrastructure and amenities and investment in new infrastructure and amenities. And you can see the totals there at $1.5 and $1.3 billion respectively. And then the allocation within each of those buckets to the different asset classes. Certainly within the renewal bucket, our underground infrastructure, so water, sewer, and then green infrastructure as well, represent a significant amount, over $500 million. Transportation and street use, we've got a huge number of assets in that class that are expensive to maintain. In terms of new investment infrastructure, you can see obviously affordable housing there is the biggest asset class. Childcare is another. Those are two service categories that traditionally have been outside and are technically outside the mandate of local government, but the City of Vancouver is making significant investments in those asset classes, and that's material because those are trade-offs against other municipal infrastructure that there is no other funding source for. In terms of the delivery of the current plan, we will not have completed, we went through the mid-cycle update in 2020. You'll recall that there was a recalibration to the plan. We actually reduced the size of the plan based on reduced development contributions. There are projects that will not be completed by the end of 2022. That's typically the case with every capital cycle. There are a number of reasons for that. In this case, obviously, the last 2 years have been extraordinary in terms of some of the external events that we've been dealing with, both in terms of our ability to move work forward during those events, so the pandemic, but also the impact that they've had on our suppliers, supply chain issues, delivery costs, so inflation rates, and so on. We also have a number of projects where we're working with third parties. So whether that's the provincial government or BC Housing, First Nations partners, the Vancouver School Board. So in some cases, a number of those projects are actually dependent on the timing of other parties, and we don't fully control those. So that has an impact on our delivery timing as well. Staff capacity is another factor. So as we're holding vacancies, that does have an impact on our ability to deliver the capital plan. So I'll wrap up then before turning it over. So in summary, the draft that we're going to be speaking about over the next, this session and the next one, does, as I say, does fit within the projected financial envelope that we have. It does invest, make significant investments in the key priority areas that we've heard from this council in relation to climate, affordability, housing, equity. We are focused very much on the renewal of our existing assets and infrastructure, and there's some very significant investments in particular projects that you'll hear about specifically. It does include growth, so investment to provide the assets and amenities that we need to support population and employment growth in the city that we're contemplating both over the next 4 years and beyond. And it represents the best efforts by staff to balance the needs across the very broad array of services that we provide as a local government. So with that, I will hand to Teresa, I think, for the next session. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. And good afternoon, Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you on this beautiful spring day. I've been asked to just talk briefly about the connection between community planning, city building, and the capital plan. Vancouver has a very long and well-established process of developing community plans with residents, business owners, other stakeholders, and many of the projects that you'll see today have been landed in those plans. Through that process of developing those plans, we do try to anticipate, we try to reflect the anticipated growth and renewal for all types of necessary infrastructure and community amenities. And I would say over the last decade or so, all of the plans that have been developed by the planning department have also had a public benefit strategy associated with them. And so you'll be familiar with these. You hear about them from your constituents, I'm sure on a weekly basis. But those public benefit strategies are done at a very high, very conceptual level. They typically just outline some anticipated funding sources in 3 broad categories, whether it's property tax, partner contributions, or developer contributions. And those plans typically have a much longer planning horizon than the 4-year capital plan. So, so there will be trade-offs, as Paul was talking about. The other connection with the planning process is the connection to the DCLs. Those do play a significant role. You've heard a little bit about that from our city manager, and Patrice will talk about that more quite a bit later. And DCLs do apply to all development, whether they go through zoning and you see it on a Tuesday or Thursday evening, or they just go straight to DP. There are a few exceptions. The DCL program and bylaw does allow for waivers and exemptions, social housing and secured market rental housing. Those projects are eligible for waivers if in exchange for affordability. Other uses like churches or small residential additions have exemptions. We do have reduced DCLs on a handful of uses like community centers, neighborhood houses, artist studios, and child's cares. That DCL program is that work to update that in connection with this capital plan is ongoing right now. The council has received a briefing back in January. The first of a second part. You'll receive a second briefing on that in May, and then we will bring that final report and recommendations to the council in June. So I think that's all I need, and I'll turn it over to Patrice.
Thank you, Teresa. And I'm going to give council a little bit of an overview of the preliminary 2023 to 2026 draft capital plan. And again, a preliminary, and that will be coming back to you with a draft plan in the end of next month, about a month from now. So in setting the capital plan, we obviously have some key goals. The first two ones you'll hear quite a bit about through this presentation is our goal is kind of twofold. One is renewing our aging infrastructure and amenities. And I've got a number of slides on that. And then, of course, building new and expanded infrastructure and amenities to serve our population and employment growth. But even within those two pillars, we also look to evolve our infrastructure and amenities so that we're addressing emerging needs, policies, service delivery models, and new partnerships that have come up. Certainly some of the work we've been doing with the government on housing has been a big shift in the last number of years. So that's an example of that. And just some context when we look at Vancouver, as a city, we're both a maturing city, but we are still a growing city. And as a maturing city, we've got aging infrastructure and facilities, and then as a growing city, expanding that infrastructure and amenities, and any unmet service expectations of the population. And then often we are asked to fill the void where there's growing pressure for us to deliver non-traditional municipal services like housing and childcare. And then, of course, emerging needs, which we've talked about quite extensively, whether it's seismic or climate change, which has a significant impact on our infrastructure and also factors into our planning. As well, we have fiscal limitations, and that is one of the key elements of doing our capital plan. We manage, as a municipality, we manage 60% of infrastructure in Canada, but only 8 to 10 cents of each tax dollar. So that is one of our challenges. When we look at the capital planning process, there are three key elements. We look at service strategies. So what are our strategies and goals for our specific areas, such as housing, such as transportation, which of course council has approved many of those strategies. And we also look at what the community strategies are, and we do that through our planning processes, our public benefit strategies that outline what our infrastructure should be looking like in different communities. So we've got the West End Community Plan, the Canby Corridor, and then the citywide strategies, which layer across all of that, resilience, sustainability. So we look at all of that as inputs into our planning process. You've also seen this slide before. This is our financial sustainability guiding principles, and you can see at the bottom, one of the key ones is around asset management, and that factors very strongly into our capital planning process, maintaining our assets in an appropriate state of repair and optimizing our capital investments to meet public and economic needs while achieving value for the investment. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think the fiscal prudence principles also certainly apply, as does affordability and cost effectiveness, and looking to drive value for money through our work on the capital as well. Now, another element, the renewal versus growth, another piece that's very helpful to understand when we look at capital planning is the difference between funding and financing. And the funding sources, that's really who pays, and financing is when to pay. So we have three primary sources of funding, which is our contributions from the city, development contributions through the development that Teresa talked about, and our partner contributions, which could be other levels of government and other partners in various areas. And then financing is really when to pay. So we do have situations where we collect funds and we set them aside in reserves. For instance, community amenity contributions, we'll set them in a reserve and then bring them into the capital plan over time. The empty homes tax would be another example. We put in a reserve and then bring it forward for acquisitions of land or other areas. Pay-as-you-go would be things that are in our current operating budget that fund capital. Sewer and water are a good example of that. You'll see there's quite a lot of funding through our sewer and water rates that support the significant capital that we have in the utility area. And then, of course, debt, which is where we take we go out into the markets, we borrow money, but then we use our funding, tax funding out of our operating budget to service that debt and repay that debt. So that's the difference between funding and financing, and it's helpful to understand as we go through our modeling for the capital plan. And again, when we talk about the range of capital funding sources, this kind of ties some of it together. The city sources, those are directed primarily for renewal. So that's our property tax, utility fees. We do have things like empty homes tax and some of those reserves, which can be used in some cases for growth, for instance, empty homes tax, buying land for future housing developments. Development contributions are directly for new or expansion expansion of existing amenities or new amenities, and that's the DCLs. We have our citywide and area-specific DCLs, and of course our utility DCL. Other cash contributions, which can come through community amenity contributions, density bonusing, or connection fees, and of course in kind, which could be land or infrastructure. And then partner can be for renewal or new, and we've got our regional partners like Translink and Metro. We've got senior governments and also community nonprofit sector or donations. The key thing for council to understand as we go into the capital plan is that you can increase funding through higher taxes and fees. So that's the city contribution. But the development contributions are really, council doesn't have control over that. The developers have determined when they are going to be developing and when those funds are available. And also the amount of it is subject to, of course, the economic viability. And then most unpredictable is the partner funding, where we don't always know that up front. And I think where this is helpful is knowing that as we create our capital plan, and again, this is our plan for the next 4 years through the budgeting process, as Paul mentioned, we adjust that. So when we get partner funding, we will update the capital plan, and we do that through the 4 years very regularly. And similarly, development contributions are higher or lower than what we had built into the plan, we would make adjustments as well. So that gives you sort of a sense of where your ability to influence at this point in time sits, but some of them we will adjust over time. Now, how is renewal funding for the capital plan determined? It's really a function of the allocation from the operating budget to support debt, and also the maximum debt capacity that we can incur as a city and still maintain our credit rating agency metrics. So we set our debt capacity, and we look at how much from the operating budget we can have to support the capital plan. So this is an example out of a $1.6 billion operating budget. If we have 2.75 available for capital, and we've determined that our debt service capacity, which is our existing debt and our new debt, is $145 million. Then some of that's going to debt servicing, but there's then new debt that can come in for $120 million that we can service. Pay-as-you-go is $100 million, and reserves $30 million. That kind of is a direct flow. So you can see that then our capital plan is funded by about $250 million, which is the impact of the debt and the debt servicing. There we go. Okay. This next slide is just this list of our capital assets and in the city. And what we highlight here, and when we do our capital planning by each of these categories, you can see the list on the left, we look not only at city assets, but also our partner assets. Because as a community, we're looking at how are we able to serve the public, and it doesn't have to be, and often isn't, the city who provides all of those assets. But we want to make sure we're planning in that context of all of the assets that are available. So this gives you a good sense of the that breakdown between city assets and partner assets. About the same as far as total replacement value, but the split is quite different. So you can see in non-market housing, the city has a number of assets, but partner assets are much bigger when we look at housing. If you look at areas like streets, sidewalks, bikeways, major roads, thousands of kilometers is much is really our bigger contribution than our partner assets, which might come through, rapid transits or highways or bridges that are within the city's area. And similarly around the water, rainwater, and sanitary water, you can see that's where our contribution is much bigger. Our assets are much bigger out of the portfolio. So we do, I think there is a document that was sent to you around the city's assets, and we look at the condition of our assets for renewal, and then we look across them both when we look at growth, how well we're servicing the public on that. And I just wanted to mention that on our city assets, there is an asset condition report that you received. I just wanted to mention that's still sort of a work in progress. There's some methodology differences, and the real estate and facilities team is still looking through that. So if you have questions on that, our GM or acting GM of real estate and facilities will be able to answer your questions. All right, this next slide just really talks about the infrastructure deficit. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on that as we've looked now at what our city assets are. We determined that the renewal funding that would be needed if we were going to just mathematically be able to renew our assets sort of in that linear fashion would be about $800 million a year. But our level of funding in the last capital plan was about $300 million a year. So really on an annual basis, we're probably about $500 million a year short if we wanted to be able to fully renew and keep all of our assets at the right level of condition. So recognizing that, a couple of years ago, as Paul said, we took a look at that, and there's two things that drive sort of that infrastructure deficit. One is the cost per unit of our cost escalation, and then improving our service standards. So doing things better and bigger and more, so they become more costly, and also just the general cost escalation and inflation. So that drives our infrastructure deficit. And on the other side is just the quantity of assets. And so where we have new assets for new services for growth, and new assets for growth, and then new assets for new services that we want to provide within our capital plan. So there's those multiple drivers that are pushing that infrastructure deficit over the years. And maybe just talking about how we're addressing the infrastructure deficit. So a few facts, the deficit is significant, it is growing. We know that our infrastructure and amenities need to be renewed unless they are going to be decommissioned, and that does happen in some cases. And most of the renewal funding comes from taxes and fees, which we know are somewhat constrained. So over the last number of years, we've been implementing a new strategy, a multi-decade intentional strategy that looks at how we can increase funding capacity for renewal, advocating more for provincial and federal funding, looking to actually limit the growth of our asset portfolio. The more we grow, the more we have to renew. And so there are other ways that we can achieve the same goals without having to own all of the assets ourselves. And then looking at how we can deliver infrastructure and amenities more efficiently. So that was that part of the chart, the unit costs, and how we can look at doing that with less cost per unit. And this chart gives you an example of some of the work that the team has done to look at how do we start to address that infrastructure deficit. And as Paul mentioned, since 2019, Council had approved an additional 1% per year to be added to our operating budget to be dedicated toward asset renewal. And what this chart shows is that if by maintaining this additional funding, it grows with time. and will help to fill that gap. So you can see the target investment rate, what our basic funding has been, and by adding that additional taxes started to fill that gap, and that compounding effect, slowly brings us closer to the target investment rate. So it's really critical for our renewal that we continue to fill that gap with that funding. Now, looking at development and partner contributions as we go into this capital plan, so we know that our tax and fee are constrained somewhat. Development contributions, we are anticipating them to be equal or lower than the last 5 to 10 years, and I think we've talked about that before through some of our development and looking at rental versus market condos and the impact of that on our development contributions. On partner contributions going into this plan, we have been somewhat conservative because we're assuming that post-pandemic, some of our partners do have financial constraints like TransLink Province and the federal government. And again, as I mentioned, if these assumptions are, as we get better information, we do adjust the plan as we go through the 4 years. Again, funding is always limited, and so the most challenging part of the capital plan is not always determining what we need to do, it's how much we can do within the funding that we have. So it is really about creating this balance of prioritization and the balance of competing needs. So we often have to balance larger one-off projects with ongoing projects. So if we have a big project like the Aquatic Center, then maybe we'll have to do fewer of the smaller ongoing projects. And then the other one is community facilities versus our civic facilities. We need to be able to do the work of the city, but there's a lot of demand for us to provide services to the public. So having that balance. Under new and expanding amenities and infrastructure, we want to support the growth in the population and employment. But we also want to make sure we're integrating with planned renewal projects. So if we're renewing, for instance, a community center and we can grow it at the same time, we will do that. So that might prioritize one community center over another one because there's this opportunity to grow and renew at the same time. So that's part of the prioritizing process. As well, if we think we can leverage senior government funding or partner funding, those will take a priority within the plan. And of course, advancing climate equity and reconciliation goals will also be factored into the prioritization. So with that, here is the summary of the draft capital plan and the funding sources. You can see city contributions. It's grown significantly, about 64% over the previous plan. And again, that has a lot to do with the infrastructure funding that has been added over the incremental infrastructure funding. Development contributions, as we mentioned, is currently set in the plan or in the preliminary draft. About 5% less than the previous plan, and partner contributions about the same. So that's how it's looking right now as far as the split. And again, we'll continue to update that over time. What this next chart shows you is, again, comparing the last plan to this plan and the funding sources. So we talked about our 3 different funding sources. This is detail on the city portion. So our debt, pay-as-you-go, and reserves. And you can see how those funding sources fit into this plan, and they total, again, about $1.7 billion of city funding, with about a large portion of it through debt, the largest through pay-as-you-go, and then some through reserves. And then on the development partners, a second. On the development partners, you've got development cost levies, which is the largest community amenity contributions. Then we have connection fees. Then on the in-kind side, we have the in-kind community and community amenity contributions and other in-kind, and that also is a very significant piece. And on the partner side, we've talked about those partners. Now, this next chart, also part of the information that you've seen, is breaking this down by the service categories. And we'll have a discussion on each of these. It'll be the key part of this workshop. But you can see how we've broken down all of our city assets in the capital plan by these categories. And you can also see in this chart where some, like housing, we talked about where development is a big portion versus the city contribution, and others where the city portion is much higher, a level like community facilities. And I also wanted to just highlight some of the large one-off projects in the capital plan, and we talked about that. That's these sort of are big projects. They take up a big chunk of the funding, and therefore that impacts maybe all of some of the other things that can be funded within the capital plan. So right now, these are projects where the construction is included in the capital plan. We also, have funding for design and planning. But the capital plan in this preliminary draft does include the Vancouver Aquatic Centre renewal, and I think all of council understands how that priority became a priority for this plan. Other areas like the Raycam Centre renewal, that again is one which is driven, the priorities driven by our partners, because that is delivered with a partner. We've got rehabilitation in our two Granville and Canby bridges, and also the Gastown, Water Street in Gastown. Burrard Slopes Park expansion, as you know, in this capital plan, council approved funding for the park, and this would be developing construction, completing that. A new Southeast False Creek, the East Park. Track and field facility at Killarney Park, and I think that was also one that we talked about in this plan, and it's now, which didn't get needed to be prioritized. We weren't able to complete that one with the school board, and so now we're looking at Killarney Park, and that's right now concluded in this preliminary draft. The P&A Outdoor Amphitheater, which council has also aware of, and then the animal shelter renewal, and again looking to do that with a partner. What's not included in this plan under construction, though there is development and planning dollars in this plan for most of these, is the West End Community Hub. Again, one of those big boulders. We had the aquatic center or the hub, and because of the number of the timing around the partnerships with that, it will continue that planning, but it's not likely that construction will happen in the time of this capital plan. And so it will need to be in the next one. Britannia Center Building 1, the Marpole Civic Center and Library will do planning. There's simply not enough development contributions in this plan for that area to complete that in this plan. Fire Hall, Arts Theatre renewal, reconstruction of the Standing Park seawall, and Fire Hall renewal. So there was a fire hall originally in the West End, which won't be happening in this plan because the West End will probably not get to construction until the next plan. But we are, just so council knows, we are in the midst of construction of the Grandview Woodlands Fire Hall, which is quite a significant one, about twice the size of an average fire hall. So that is going to be delivered shortly. And just so council has a sense of the flexibility in these in the capital plan, which we sort of say a lot of it is fixed between some of those big boulders and things that are already underway. Things like in-kind contributions are really not flexible. That's driven by the development community, and those we don't have flexibility. Again, those one-time projects that can't be phased, they're either in or out, or ones that have commitments from partners like Raycam, where we need to leave them in. Ones that are more flexible is where they could be phased, so we may do part of a program or part of a project and the second phase in another capital plan, or where there are programs that are scalable, like the number of sidewalks that we update. Those we can, council has the ability to say, I'll do more or less of those or trade those off with something else. So just to give you a sense of what some of your flexibility is in what you've seen so far in the preliminary plan. And here's just a little picture of sort of some of those sample trade-offs. So if you look at what $50 million could buy, in non-market housing, that would be one project, probably 100 units, and that would increase the supply by only about 0.5%. Housing is a very big asset class, as you know. And the funding there would be 10 million from the city and partner 40. For illustration, it's generally a more partner than city. Full day childcare for $50 million, you could deliver 4 to 5 projects, which would be about 250 spaces. That would increase the supply by about 5%, and the city would be the larger funder there with some partner funding. Parkland for $50 million, 20 parcels, about 1 hectare. Very little increase total in the total supply of parks, again, because of the size, and that's primarily city funded. Transportation or public space. Again, some of this is one of the scalable programs that we talked about. So 100 pedestrian crossings, which would be a 10% increase, 10 kilometers of active transportation corridors, increase about 3%, and 10 plazas would increase the proportion of plaza by 40%. And again, primarily funded by the city, but we do have partner contributions for that. So I think that ends my summary of the preliminary draft capital plan, and I'm going to just pass it back to Karen for to coordinate questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice.
Thanks so much.
So thank you. So that is the extent of the introductory presentations. We'd now turn it over to you, Mayor Stewart, to decide how long you want to ask questions of staff and discuss among yourselves. I will say that there's a really fulsome set of presentations coming on the specific asset classes by each of the asset class owners you see behind me. So you might want to just ask a single round of questions now, start into those presentations, and then really get into the depth of the questioning and conversation at our April 7th session. So thank you.
Sure. What I'll just remind council is that there's no vote today, so you can ask questions or make statements at this point. So just let it roll however you like. I do just have 4 councillors on the list right now, so I'll start with Councillor Carr, the regular up to 5 minutes, and keeping in mind that there are much more detailed presentations about each of these, and maybe I can ask the Deputy City Manager if you're aware, because I'm sure you've memorized all these presentations, that if you're aware that there's more details about a particular question, maybe you can let us know and flag it when it comes up.
I'll do my
Thanks.
best.
So, Councillor Carr first.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And for fairness, I'm really happy to see this workshop as a first time that we're doing it. It's super helpful. So I see at the very start it talked about the fact that we do have 2 councillor motions that affect this. One of them mine, one of them Councillor Swanson's, and I saw hers with a kind of an amount of money, etc. How are you embedding climate work? There's no sort of specific category of infrastructure spending around climate. So can somebody explain how you're dealing with that?
Sure, I'll turn that over to the finance team to respond. I will start by saying that the team is in the process of attributing each priority to each investment. And so we will be able to come to council in the future with X percent of the plan relates to climate, Y percent of the plan relates to housing, and so on. Some are more easily teased out than others, as you're saying. Grace Cheng, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
This is Grace Chang, Director of Long-Term Financial Strategy. So Karen said it all. Because sustainability or climate emergency, it is not just a category by itself. It actually kind of span, transportation, parks, and a number of other categories. So we will report back in terms of, in totality, once the plan is done, we can actually quantify how much is relating to climate.
If I could just add, the team is definitely, as you've heard from the 3 speakers this morning, there's a lot of complexity in deciding what goes in. The team has been very much thinking about council's priorities as we've made the allocations for what you see in front of you today. So we're doing our best to balance a lot of different priorities, including definitely the council motions that were put forward recently.
Excellent. Another sort of big picture question. How are you assessing risk to our infrastructure in a different way because of the change in climate? I'm particularly thinking about the risks, for example, the seawall and the increased storms, sea level rise, higher winds. I'm thinking also that, I'm thinking of Lytton and, the incredible increased heat, dryness. I worry about all the wood frame buildings and the idea that we could have a fire spread. So how are you contemplating that? And if so, how are you thinking it would apply to the allocation of resources in the capital plan?
Absolutely, that's one of the priorities and criteria among many that is being considered. The city does have a council-approved climate adaptation plan that's taken into consideration as the allocations are made. Grace, anybody from your team want to add to that?
No, I don't think we have anything to add. Maybe I think someone from sustainability is here. Maybe they can add something to it.
I don't know. It's hard to know with the WebEx. Is somebody here from sustainability here today?
Yeah, Karen, Doug Smith, Director of Sustainability. So regarding the climate change adaptation, we have been going back as far as 2012 to look at the impacts, and we've been changing the size of our sewer pipes and planning for it. More recently, we've done a hazard vulnerability and risk assessment analysis for the whole city, and we're looking at how climate and all the other risks sort of interact, and we'll be bringing that back to council either late this year or early next year with more information about how we respond to it, both through the funding and also just through our policies. So we're working on it.
Okay. Okay. Patrice at one point said something like there is a significant share of development contributions to the capital plan. What's that share? Right, Patrice? Or is that the partner share, or is that where we're always seeing partner, or where?
Yeah, so the development contributions are about 1.5 billion out of the total 3.4 billion. So at about half it goes to the total. Yeah, I just slide them.
Okay, and we're estimating that developer share, that's not going to decrease. Is that right? I mean, the projection is that that's not going to decrease, but there's going to be a potential decrease in senior government share.
No, so there were a couple of points that we made. One is that in this preliminary plan, we have the development contributions are about 5% less than the last plan, and I think that's reflecting, more rental, et cetera. So we're not getting as many of those development contributions. And then what I said is, if it changes through the plan, we can add that to the plan. On the partners, we are anticipating we're being pretty conservative, so it's about flat because we know that they're all under financial pressures as well. Again, they will probably be more programmatic where, the federal government will come up with something and they'll put, their money into one particular area and then we could respond. But we don't expect just overall that we aren't building a lot more into senior government funding into this plan because of that sort of the financial situation we expect they're in. But again, that's an area where we can adjust as we go through the plan.
Thank you.
Great. Councillor Kirby-Yung.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also going to stay high level to start and just building off of Councillor Carr. There are actually 3 council motions with respect to the capital plan. There was also, in addition to climate and housing, the one that talked about centering civic infrastructure and community facilities in the plan. So my question high level is this, and I'm looking at the 2019 to 2022 capital plan slide, shows the investment in it existing in infrastructure. And the city manager made the comment that part of what had happened in the last number of years was choices by council to invest in other areas that typically had been outside of the city's area of responsibility, specifically housing and childcare. And I recognize that we have to talk about source of funding, but it's pretty telling when you look at that slide, and this is leading me to my question, where you see affordable housing at $500 million, childcare at $116 million, and yet you juxtapose that against the other slide that says we have a $500 million deficit every year, and those numbers start to line up again. I preface that by saying source of funding. So my question is this, is that if council, would we have the ability, two-part question, to really expedite and close that gap on our civic infrastructure and community centers renewal and the gaps that we have, as well as our environmental considerations in terms of sustainability and the impact on our infrastructure, if we were to refocus back to 4 city priorities from that perspective, part A. And part B to the question is, could council get information back within those 2 categories for housing and childcare as to what is unencumbered, what comes from DCLs that needs to be spent, for example, that's mandated by the bylaw, versus what is unencumbered that could potentially be reallocated to enable that conversation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And just for everybody's benefit, Councillor Kirby-Young's referring to slide 37 in your presentation, and I'm going to ask Patrice to come up again and respond to those questions.
Maybe I will start and then I'll pass it over to the capital team who have more of the details, Councillor Kirby-Yung. But on that slide, what you'll see is for housing and childcare, the city portion, there's a big portion that is development contributions. When we have development contributions, they cannot be reallocated to another area. So the growth can't be used for renewal. So we can't make that trade-off between a development contribution for really any of the areas, whether it's childcare and housing or not, to renewal. So that's why we really look at the renewal bucket separately. What we can do is as we talked about, is looking at, are there other ways for us to deliver that we don't take on assets, which increases our renewal burden. The other piece is just in this capital plan, a lot of it is for that's recognized here as development contributions are contributions that are already achieved through through development, and so they are required to be used for what they've been identified for. So as you know, when there's like a DCL allocation, we have an allocation between housing, childcare, et cetera. So it has to be used for that. So most of this is already funds that are underway. I think where council will have an opportunity to shift from the growth side is when we do the DCL review later this summer, and look at future growth. So on the growth side, this is
Can I jump in just
does that make sense?
It does. So can I jump in just to direct the question
Mm-hmm.
for time? Because when you're talking about the DCL review this summer and council is being asked to approve this capital plan early July, I'm looking for how those pieces can meaningfully come together. And if I look at something like, for example, because I'm realizing that some of the funding can just be used for new. We, for example, have a gap. Fire halls is a really key one. It's not just renewal, but it's a gap, for example, in the Canby corridor where we don't have sufficient fire halls, I'm told, by the fire department. And this conversation has happened since the late 90s. And we have 40, 50,000 new residents and not the service in there. So we could conceivably, public safety is pretty significant, reallocate some of that funding for critical things like public safety at a fire hall, correct? So can we zero that down, because it's not fully broken out in terms of what is committed pursuant to the DCLs and what's new? Is that information that council could get back, distilled down a bit more clearly?
Yeah, and well, just to remind council, DCLs can't be used for fire halls. So again, there's a lot of complexity around what funding can be used for what. But
just to be clear, I'm talking about taking out what is committed versus seeing what is not committed, so that council can make decisions around the uncommitted funds in terms of how they feel that it's best spent to address the priorities for Vancouverites.
right. And Grace, do you want to comment on whether we have that information available?
Yes, we can make that information available. And to add to that, I think you're also wanting to look at right now what is already committed that is presented and incorporated in this plan, and what is something that in the future that council can actually adjust. So we can actually kind of break it down into what is the money in the bank that we cannot reallocate because of those restrictions, and then the future things that council can actually decide as part of the DCR review as well. But one thing, just want to kind of maybe further reiterate what Patrice said. When you look at the slide, say, for example, in particular housing and childcare, you see a lot of in-kind turnkey amenities delivered through development. Those are part of those conditions of rezoning that council already approved. So I think right now it's not a matter of we can change the delivery at this point. So these are just timing of it when we're going to receive it as part of conditions of rezoning.
Okay, I'd love to get some info. I know I'm at time, but I'd love to get some information back on that.
Thanks. Council, we're at 4:00 now with 2 hours remaining. I know lots of details to come. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folks left on the list. Just use your time however you like. I just trying to just let you know where we're at. Okay, Councillor Swanson.
Yeah, first question is about the housing motion that got passed yesterday. I know this is really fast since it was passed yesterday, but is there any kind of timeline as to when we can get a report back about how much we would need to meet our affordability targets?
Grace, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, actually, we have been working with ACCS and the BAHAB team, so we will need to kind of determine like what is required to report back. So I think this is something that we need to kind of let council know after this workshop in terms of timing.
Okay, but we could get something before we have to make a final decision?
We will try to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Second, I think that I heard a while back that we're expecting a report on DCLs that might consider us waiving DCLs on rentals, or reconsider the waiving of DCLs on rentals. And I'm wondering if this would have much of an impact on DCL revenue one way or the other.
I'm going to ask Teresa O'Donnell to respond to that. I just want to point out to council that May 9th, you are going to receive a DCL briefing, and you'll have much more detail about this topic then.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. This is Teresa O'Donnell. We will do remember we did a briefing with council, very high level in January about DCLs. We're continuing to analyze that in terms of what our revenue projections are, eligible projects, projects that aren't eligible. All that information will be brought to you on May 9th. You'll have plenty of time to ask questions and provide input, and then the final report and recommendations come to the council, I believe, June 22nd. And again, you'll have certainly a lot of advance time to present questions to us and shape that plan.
Okay, thanks. You said in the presentation that we've set aside a 1% tax increase for infrastructure renewal, and at this rate, we're about 500 million short. What if we set aside a 2% tax increase for the coming years? How would that impact our infrastructure renewal?
Grace, can you take that, please?
Yes, every percent, basically, each percent increase each year would generate roughly $100 million over 4 years. So if you double that, there will be another $100-ish million for the next 4 years. This is definitely within council direction as well.
Okay, and the last question I have is the Southeast Falls Creek Park. Is that where the McDonald's is now?
I'm going to ask Donnie Rosa, our GM of the Board of Parks and Recreation, to respond to that.
And on part of it?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. The McDonald's property is not part of that. It's actually the other side. It's the East Park. It's by Science World.
Okay, so are we still looking at maybe having housing or something where the McDonald's is?
I'm going to ask, is Dan Garrison on the line to respond to that? Maybe Teresa, can you respond to that? Oh, Ryan. Okay, we're gonna get back to you with an answer on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. That's it for me. Thanks for the presentation.
Great.
Really complicated.
Councillor Weed.
Yeah, first question, high level. Seeing that we're getting documents showcasing some projects that are in the draft plan and some that aren't in the draft plan, can you talk a little bit about that staff process on determining which ones will be in and which ones won't be?
Sure. So the question is about determining which of the very large one-off projects get into the plan and which ones don't. Before I turn it over to the finance team to respond to you, I'll say that, as I said earlier, there's an enormous number of criteria which involve availability of funding, because different funding pools are only allowable for certain projects. So that's a big one. Readiness to go, if there are partners involved, are our partners ready? The alignment with council's priorities, and I'm probably missing a couple. Renewal versus growth, balances and trade-offs. So Grace, is there anything you want to add to that list of criteria?
No, I think you have covered all. Maybe I can, Michelle, do you have anything to add? Michelle DeRoche?
Michelle DeRoche, long-term financial planning. Karen covered a lot of them. The only other thing I would add maybe is projects that are in the queue. So if someone has started the planning and scoping of a project in the current capital plan, there's an inherent sort of step forward on that one. So we would likely give higher prioritization, especially if it's a project that relates to renewal of existing assets. So get the project done so that we can move to the next renewal project.
Okay, so this prioritizes certain projects instead of others because of where the funding is. And my question's kind of building on what Park Board did with the initiative zones and what we've seen the Vancouver plan on where we need facilities in areas of the city that have a lack, right? There's a gap in how much access there's facilities or green space in certain parts of cities more than others. And we've seen those gaps where the heat dome was higher because they don't have tree structures, but they don't have the DCL funding to get some of these capital infrastructure facilities. So I'm wondering how we're making sure that we have this strict way of finding and funding projects, but how are we ensuring that they're going into the initiative zones or the areas of the city that need it the most?
staff uses very much those maps to figure out where different amenities are needed within different neighborhoods. But we are also constrained, as we shared with you, by the funding sources. Some of the CAC pools are limited to different geographies. So the short answer is we're doing our best within the constraints. Michelle or Grace, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I can add a little bit to that. Yeah, this has been, I would say, a known challenge. So basically going forward as part of the Vancouver plan, we would look at almost kind of like a more citywide approach in terms of public benefit strategy and also the funding mechanism. So that will be part of the report back as well.
Okay, thanks. Recognizing that our last capital budget, there's a significant amount that we weren't able to deliver. Can you talk about how that's the funding that wasn't able to be spent in this year's capital plan, how that'll be transferred over to the new capital plan?
Yes, Grace, can you respond to that, please?
Yes, I can. One of the key, I would say, key funding, funding component that has not been allocated in the current capital plan is actually relating to the Marple Community Center renewal and expansion, and that will come to council before the end of this capital plan. So the majority of the unfunded or unallocated funding will be allocated, but in the event that there's some residual funding, we don't necessarily call it bring it carry forward. It is just kind of embedded as the starting funding envelope for the new capital plan. So that funding is not going to be lost.
Okay, my last question, recognizing we had a difficult time with COVID and we've had to cut back on certain service categories, I'm wondering if we have a diagram that shows the 12 service categories and which ones took the biggest hit or cut back or haven't been able to be delivered in this current capital plan, and which ones do we assume, because I know that DCLs dropped significantly in One Water and certain service departments took larger hits, like Parkport as well. So I'm just wondering if we have a metrics that shows which service areas took the biggest hit in the reduction in capital spending and delivery, and how do we expect to make it up in the next capital plan?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say there's two ways that so-called hit could have happened. One is that during the recalibration midterm for the capital plan, when the pandemic hit, some projects got paused. And the other way is that perhaps something's still in the capital plan, but that hasn't been fully able to be delivered for the reasons Paul shared with you earlier. So, Grace, can we prepare that information for council and bring it back to them?
Yes, yeah, we can try to do that. Yeah, so I just want to also clarify one thing, or maybe reiterate one thing, is that none of those projects are really kind of lost in a way, because I mean, for capital projects, in particular for renewal, if we cannot complete in the current capital plan, it will just gonna be, it needs to be done in the future capital plan, that's all, because the obligation is not going anywhere, so I wouldn't say that it's kind of like disappeared from the work plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hardwick.
Thank you. My question's for Patrice. On December 3rd, we received a memorandum from you with the subject heading Report Back on City Funds Allocated to Downloaded Services that have traditionally been delivered by senior governments. There's description in it, but in the end of the report, if you'll recall, there's a table that breaks down the dollars spent between the operating and capital budget, looking at the senior levels of government. Will you be going through a similar process looking at this capital plan going forward?
We have not done that specifically with the capital plan. Like in capital, the main categories would be housing and childcare. So we are going to talk about that when it comes to our DCL review and how we allocate the DCLs that come to the city. So that would be the biggest piece. Some of that is DCL, some of it is, of course, in kind, which council approves as the developments come forward. So those are the two largest categories that are sort of outside of city's primary mandate, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I understand that, but that's not what I asked. And this is a request, therefore, that the same process that you went through in producing this memo, sorry about any noise in the background, be applied in this case. I think we need to be informed by this as we look forward at what the potential downloading is. And yes, I acknowledge the areas that you've outlined as being the big ticket items, but I think for consistency's purposes, it would be very useful for council to be able to do a direct comparison on this.
We can highlight those for you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bly.
Thanks very much. Yeah, just one quick follow-up question, remaining pretty high level at this stage, given the presentation, and appreciate this workshop very much. From a holistic view, and without presupposing larger development plan decisions that are coming to this council before the end of our term, I'm wondering what the best advice, and perhaps this question is for planning department and also Patrice, you know, what is the best advice that you have for council when considering how to contemplate plans like the Broadway plan is one example that could support DCL revenue that would support a lot of this renewal infrastructure that we're hearing is at risk and that we're facing a deficit when it comes to funding in terms of renewal. And I'm thinking in this capital plan, but also long term, just where do the two intersect? Because they're going to be very separate conversations, and I'm wondering your advice to council on how to bring those two conversations together.
Thank you for the question. Teresa O'Donnell's going to respond.
Thank you, Councillor. That's an excellent question. When we come back to you in May, we'll be talking about some, what we're working on right now is we're working on the DCL rates and the allocations, the revenue and cash flow projections. We're doing some economic testing. We're also looking at those waivers and exemptions. And so we'll be bringing all of that to council for consideration and your input and direction. The other big thing to consider as we move to the right supply, as we move away from strata, as we move to rental and affordable rental particularly, we do decrease our ability to capture those DCLs and CACs. That will all be part of the conversation. We're also, I was just taking a look at the final draft of the housing needs assessment, and that report will come to you at the end of April, I believe. And we have some interesting insights to share from that too.
Okay, great.
Sorry,
That's
Councillor,
very helpful.
if I could just add one clarification question, because you referenced in your question the infrastructure deficit and DCLs. And just to be clear, we can't attribute DCLs or allocate DCLs against renewal of existing infrastructure. DCLs can only be allocated to support growth. So development revenues, whether they be CACs or DCLs, don't actually help with our existing infrastructure deficit. That's a fundamental challenge that we face.
Okay, I appreciate that. I've heard conflicting perspectives in various conversations, so I'm not challenging that directly, Paul. And you can imagine the complexity of this capital plan and what those infrastructure deficits look like. That I guess my only advice is that we very much have to be extremely transparent and on the same page in terms of what first, what defines what, because we don't want to be justifying, for example, density in the Broadway plan to fund infrastructure renewal if that's not actually possible. And it's not been sort of a straightforward conversation. I just hope that we make sure that it is as we navigate this, and also concurrent processes that are happening around development. So
thanks. We'll do our best. Definitely, it's complicated, and it's good advice to make sure we clearly communicate that.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I had a similar question to Councillor Wiebe around interest in seeing a map of kind of the distribution of investments around the city. I think that would be a useful tool. The rest of my questions I actually am just happy to send in, and just wanted to clarify if councillors type up and send in questions, send them into the city manager's office, and those can then be answered at or in written form before the next meeting. Is that a good process?
Yes, thanks for mentioning that. I meant to, which is any questions council sends to us, we will respond to at the April 7th session, in session, so that it will be on the public record.
Okay, and I assume sooner the better so that staff aren't scrambling the night before.
We would appreciate that.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll leave the rest of my questions. Thanks.
Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thanks, and appreciate this workshop. Great questions asked, a lot of question answers. I'm curious, so we did get a letter from the park board today reflecting some disappointment that their priorities weren't articulated in this draft capital plan, and I'm wondering if we could get some clarification on that, please.
Sure, I'll ask Donnie Rosa to come up to speak to that. Donnie.
Thank you, Councillor. In preparing for this presentation and knowing that some of this material would be publicly shared, the process with the park board so far has been to workshop with them. However, they have not endorsed our plan or the plan from the park board perspective, but there will come a time in this process for them to do that. So they wanted you to know that this was not this draft plan was not necessarily endorsed at this time, so the time will come for that. Thank you.
Okay, well that sounds a lot more reasonable then. I appreciate that clarification. I think the rest of my questions, I didn't hear a lot of talk about East Fraser lands, although I did see it in one of the supporting documents, and appreciate that is coming as an in-kind. I know that's been a big priority that's been talked about quite some time. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks.
Councillor Swanson, you have a minute.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if in another presentation on the capital plan, could staff highlight for us which of the items contribute that are proposed to be in the capital plan, which of them contribute to GHG reductions?
Yes, thanks for the question, and we do intend to bring you. I don't know if it'll be that specific, but we're working on kind of attributing the different cities' different priorities and councils' different priorities to each major plan element. We have a theme called climate change. I don't know if we'd get as specific as GHG reductions. Can we take that away and get back to council with how easy or hard that would be to do?
Sure. I think the difference is between preventing climate change and adapting to it. So there's two kinds of expenses there that we have to deal with, I guess.
Understood. Yeah. We let us take that away, and if we can, we will.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bly.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Just a quick follow-up to Councillor Fry's comments. I just want to ensure, I'm not sure the communication, if it came from the park board staff. I certainly don't have any correspondence from park board. So if that's perhaps a miss and an important part of this process, I just would like to see about having that circulated to all of council.
Donnie, just respond to that quickly. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bly. That should have been circulated. I will double check to make sure it is. And I'll just say that I will address some of the points from the letter in my presentation. Okay. I look forward to receiving the letter. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. That's it for questions. Turn it back over to you, Deputy City Manager.
Thank you. We're doing great with time. Okay. There's my screen again. Wonderful. Okay, so what we're going to do now is it's going to take about 2 hours, and we won't finish it today, but we'll get through a lot of it. And we're going to ask each general manager that represents a service category, and Paul shared with you those 12 overarching service categories, to present an overview of their service category. And you can see up on the screen here what they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you a little bit of an overview, some highlights of the achievements in that category over your term to date, or the last 4 years. The highlights in the current preliminary draft plan you have before you in terms of what's addressed in this service category in the draft right now. Where there's a board involved, being Parks and Recreation, Library, and Police Board, you will hear the relevant board direction. And the service category owner will also talk to you about the unfunded elements in the capital plan as it sits now. I just want to reiterate what you see before you in terms of the capital plan. We've double qualified it. It's a preliminary draft, so we're still work in progress. But we're going to talk about what it looks like today. And I'm going to time people. We've done this internally. It worked really well, actually. And we have some nice slides to share with you. This is the schedule. We might, depending on availability and who's here, we might move around the schedule a little bit. But if you're referred to slide 44 in your main deck, you'll see the schedule. We're going to start with Donnie from talking about parks and open space. I'll be timing people and giving you a little bit of a signal, presenters, when you're done. And the idea is, Council, write down all your questions because you won't have a chance to ask questions on this until April 7th. So write them down or either email them in to me or write them down and ask them on April 7th. So with that, I'm going to change decks. Give me a sec here. And Donnie, over to you. Just use that arrow key to.
Thank you kindly. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Donnie Rosa. They and she are my pronouns. I'm the GM of Parks and Recreation. And as a person who identifies as gender non-binary, it's nice to be seen today. And I will say that I feel seen as a leader in this organization every day. So thank you for that. Now you can start my clock. Please. The Parks and Open Space service category captures the capital projects developed to serve the many needs of residents, workers, and visitors to Vancouver. Within the capital planning process, we break down these service areas into 5 categories. Parkland, capturing land acquisition to grow the park system. Seawall and waterfront, which I will come back to. Urban forest and natural areas. Park amenities, this includes all park renewals and the individual amenities such as playgrounds and sport fields. Park buildings, infrastructure, and vehicles. It is also important when considering parks and open spaces to recognize that they are essential to the fabric of this city. And the pandemic taught us that they are critical to keeping Vancouverites safe, healthy, resilient, and connected. Looking back over the past 4 years, they have been, of course, unlike anything we ever imagined. We have seen enormous growing complexities affecting our projects and timelines, specifically over the last 2 years. From COVID to major climate events, encampments, and in managing animal populations, our teams have had to pivot repeatedly in ways that have been difficult to predict. A recent survey of Canadians found that almost 3/4 said their appreciation for parks and green spaces has increased during the pandemic. They also reported parks have been critical to their mental health, physical health, and in addition to connection to nature and social connections, they want to see greater investment. While dealing with external impacts internally, we have been altering our work practices towards decolonization and fostering our important and ongoing collaborations with the local First Nations. Despite these challenges and changes, we achieved a great deal towards our goals in Parks and Open Space capital delivery. We delivered Van Play, our Parks and Recreation Master Plan. We acquired new parkland in Burrard Slopes and Grandview Woodland. We reached our tree planting goal and planted our 150,000th tree. And we delivered more capital projects than in any previous plan. Specifically, since the onset of COVID in March 2020, we delivered habitat restoration projects at Tatlow Creek and Beaver Lake and naturalized 70 acres of meadows. 8 new renewed parks, including the downtown park at Smythe and Richards that will open in April, 13 new and renewed playgrounds and fitness parks, a pop-up park at Main and 7th, a plaza at Sunset Beach, and a new temporary bike lane in Stanley Park. Sorry. It's tough to see the small print up there. Looking forward to the next 4 years of capital delivery, the current draft plan identifies some exciting projects. These include delivering new parks in Southeast Falls Creek and Burrard Slopes, expand parks like W.C. Shelley near Commercial and Broadway, renewing high-need parks such as Strathcona and John Hendry, improving and expanding our tree canopy and parks, converting existing parkland to healthy habitat and supportive biodiversity, delivering a new track and field at Killarney, finally providing the city a full 8-lane regulation facility for training and events, upgrading, renewing, and building new sport amenities, including fields, diamonds, and courts, As you know, there's a great need in this area. Renewing and electrifying park vehicles and equipment, maintaining and repairing our existing seawall and shoreline, including protecting upland recreational facilities, planning and implementing projects with a focus on adapting our coastline over the long term. We have climate adaptation on the top of our minds. Park Board adopted policy sets the direction for parks and recreation services and priorities, including capital investments. Over the past 4 years, the board has guided work in this area to better understand the needs, opportunities, constraints, and priorities for many parks and recreation services. These strategies and plans then direct capital investments for parks and recreation services, including broad and overarching topics such as urban forest strategy, biodiversity strategy, as well as Van Play, which includes specific guidance on capital investments and asset targets. Van Play is also the overarching document for other more specific strategies, including people, parks, and dogs, washroom strategy, local food action plan, and the upcoming skate and sport field strategies. The Board of Parks and Recreation also directs the capital planning process through motions, including the climate emergency and co-management with Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. The current capital plan under review at this workshop is limited by the funding envelopes for each service area. In parks and open space, there are many priority projects that are not currently listed as provisionally funded, including converting park water features to use recirculating water instead of potable water. This is concerning as bylaws require this change if the water features are to continue running. This includes such park icons as the QE Park Quarry Garden Waterfall. Renewing and maintaining critical park buildings. This is work that must happen to meet building code standards to allow existing park buildings to be used by community groups and the public. Without funding, the buildings will sit empty, and we may ultimately have to spend money to demolish them, while we lose potential revenues associated with operating them, and the community loses access to important space. Number 3, developing rainwater integration or green infrastructure projects in collaboration with our partners in engineering. Working with our colleagues, we would help ease pressure on the city's stormwater system and augment wildlife habitat in parks at the same time. Number 4, investing in new and renewed sport fields and diamonds needs much more than is currently within the funding envelope. Without a sizable investment, we risk player injuries. Think about dogs digging in parks and slick mud surfaces. And size limits on our teams and clubs, as we have one of the lowest service capacities in the entire region for sport fields. With increasing demand, decreasing field quality, and cost escalation, this funding is a critical need to keep fields open, safe, and meeting the needs of children, youth, and adults for active recreation and social connections. And number 5, finally, critical park infrastructure, such as electrical, sanitary, and water supply lines to buildings that is an unseen risk. The public regularly experiences service disruption and closures as we respond to infrastructure failures as an emergency response. Proactive improvements avoid the closures and increased costs associated with these emergency responses. These are just 5 of the items that are unfortunately unfunded in the current draft plan for parks and open spaces, and the letter referenced these unfunded items. Community facilities? Yeah.
Donnie's going to carry on now with the recreation facilities, also with the park board. And you have 8 minutes for this one.
I can do it in 7.5. Moving to the next service category, critical to parks and recreation is recreation facilities. And as I'm sure all of you have been visiting these facilities regularly, you are familiar with our local community centers, senior centers, swimming pools, ice rinks, and specialty recreation facilities. These cornerstones of our neighborhoods offer essential spaces for residents to gather, socialize, exercise, and share arts, culture, and community building activities. Similar to parks and open spaces, the pandemic truly highlighted the critical role these spaces play in fostering a sense of well-being and connection and a place for safety among our most vulnerable residents. Within the recreation facilities categories, capital investments are broken down by projects such as new and renewed community centers and programs, which includes renovations and capital maintenance. Over the past 4 years, recreation facilities have flexed and adapted more than ever before. Like parks and open spaces, community centers were essential second responders during emergencies, responding to critical needs for social connection, health, resilience, and safety during COVID and our major climate events, including extreme cold, heat dome, and smoke events. The teams have risen to the challenge and supported residents at every turn. While growing and adapting to the new normal, we delivered many key capital delivery achievements, including delivering the schematic design for the Marpole Community Center and Pool, completing renovations on the West Point Gray Community Center, completing the master plan and rezoning for Britannia, as well as initiating the functional programming for Building 1, which includes the pool, recreation space, and childcare. Number 4, finalized the MOU with BC Housing for RACAM and initiated the rezoning and functional programming. We also finalized the MOU with the VSB for the West End Community Center and ice rink and have initiated the master planning process. Finally, we have also initiated the work to renew the Plaza Nations, including a community center, an ice rink, and the first phase of design is in progress. Looking forward to the next 4 years of capital delivery, the current draft plan identifies some exciting projects, including renewing and expanding Raycam Community Center, renewing and expanding the Vancouver Aquatic Center, aiming to complete that planning, detailed design, and tendering. Delivery of the new East Fraserlands Community Center, which is delivered in kind by the developer, as well as the delivery of new facilities in the Northeast Falls Creek, including the community center and ice rink, both delivered in kind by the developer. As mentioned earlier, Park Board adopted policy sets the direction for parks and recreation services and priorities, including capital investments. Over the past 4 years, the board has guided work in this area to better understand the needs, opportunities, constraints, and priorities for many recreation services. These strategies direct capital investment priorities for recreation facilities and services. Key policy direction comes from Van Play and Van Splash, as well as our upcoming community center strategy. As I mentioned previously, additional direction comes directly through board motions. For example, the motion to deliver a new outdoor pool at the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. And finally, I'm almost there. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, the current draft capital plan under review at this workshop is limited by the funding envelopes for each service area. In recreation facilities, there are many priority projects that are not currently listed as provisionally funded, including the design and construction of an outdoor pool in Mount Pleasant, which is a high priority project missing from the current draft plan. This need is identified in Van Splash and is reinforced through a board motion. Omitting this project undermines the board's ability to meet service goals. Community centers, as well as recreation facilities, ice rinks, and pools need renovation and maintenance renovation and maintenance investments to maintain and extend building life. Without proper investment in maintenance and renovations, we risk shortening the life of our buildings, as well as limiting use and efficiency of these spaces. These risks include no conversion to low-charge ammonia systems, rink closures, and pool closures. Accessibility and inclusion improvements are also currently underfunded. Without these projects, we risk exacerbating existing social isolation and mental health impacts for people with diverse needs. Number 4, developing plans and policies for recreation facilities. Without doing our homework and working with our partners, stakeholders, and residents, we cannot properly improve our service delivery or allocate our resources in a way that responds to user needs. An example of this is developing an allocation policy for our fields and ice sheets to ensure fair and equitable access to these public amenities. And number 5, finally, we do not currently have funding to initiate the planning for the next 2 community centers prioritized for renewal. Our community center associations have been working tirelessly with our staff to help deliver a community center strategy coming forward in just a few weeks. The recommendations included in that strategy will provide a prioritized list to guide community center renewals. Without funding, we risk delaying implementation of this important strategy undermining our relationship with our Community Center Association partners, and not addressing community center renewal needs. As Council is aware, the Park Board did address a letter to the Council with their concerns on this draft plan. With that, I will end here, and I'll thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Donnie, actually giving us back some time. Actually, Council, there's a pretty good chance we're going to get through almost all the presentations today, which is wonderful. There's a few people that aren't here, so we won't get through all of them, but we're making good time.
Do you think, Deputy City Manager, we might then add a few questions on the end, or you rather just try to get through? Just maybe you can chew that over while we get to the next presentation.
Why don't we see where we get to it by the time we're done? We'll see what time it is. Next up, we have Christina de Castel, our Chief Librarian. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm happy to be with you today. Christina de Castel, Chief Librarian and CEO at Vancouver Public Library. VPL's physical facilities are made up of Central Library at 390,000 square feet and 20 neighborhood branches that range in size from 1,900 to 16,000 square feet. Pre-COVID, one branch of VPL would receive about 77 visits per hour on average, while Central Library would receive more than 500 visits per hour. We're well on our way back to those levels. Every day, our staff see how vitally important the indoor spaces of libraries are for providing resources to read and learn, computers and Wi-Fi to connect, and a place to be together with others who are different from us and are also part of our community. Places where we have informal, safe interactions help people to feel belonging and connection in Vancouver. Vancouver's libraries are among the most heavily used in Canada, perhaps because of our smaller living spaces and issues with affordability. However, most of the library's branches were built from 1945 to 1980, and we've been able to renew just 8 of them in the last 30 years. Our biggest learning from 2021 was the importance of the library during climate events. The heat dome had people streaming into Central Library and all of our branches. We're thankful that we had the air conditioning and filtration systems to support them during this, and that when air quality was low due to wildfire particulates, this was the case because during this capital plan, we put a focus on HVAC upgrades and capital maintenance. In addition, we focused on accessibility upgrades. After assessments by the Reconvening Foundation and Spark, we upgraded many smaller features like door handles, taps, and towel dispensers, and we added ramps where they were missing, including at Central Library on the patios and at Fraserview Branch. We undertook renovations at a number of branches, and we moved Oak Ridge Branch into a temporary location at the Perrette Centre. Our major projects, including at Oak Ridge and in the West End for Joe Fortes, continued in the planning and design phases. We were proud to be able to open our first 2 early learning centers in this capital plan at Renfrew and Britannia branches, which were fully funded by donations from the VPL Foundation and past fundraising. In the next capital plan, we're looking forward to the opening of the new Oak Ridge Library in 2024. The previous branch was 13,000 square feet and saw more than 260,000 visits per year, and the new branch will be more than 22,000 square feet within a civic center. We're deep in detailed planning now, and next year we'll see this continue, with purchasing starting for the collections and equipment needed to open. In addition, we'll continue with planning for the Joe Fortes and Marpole branches. These are 2 very small and busy branches. Joe Fortes sees more visits than Oak Ridge, even though it's a third of the former Oak Ridge's size. In Marpole, our 3,600 square foot branch is desperately in need of replacement, with 134,000 visits per year and inadequate electrical power. As planning continues through this capital plan, we're looking forward to moving into a leased space that will better meet the community's needs until a permanent solution is placed and planning can occur. We'll keep working with city staff on maintenance and improvements for climate readiness, as well as improvements for accessibility in this plan, which we hope can include a renovation of the Central Library washrooms on the main floor to include an adult change table, as recommended by the Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee. The Library Board determines priorities for VPL renewal and approved a facilities master plan in 2018. They have renewed those priorities for this capital plan, including the Oak Ridge, Marpole, Joe Fortes, and Joyce Collingwood branches. The board recognizes the importance of facilities maintenance and is requesting $200,000 per year for branch refurbishments across our 20 locations. In addition, it's a priority for the board to move forward on revitalizing the Children's Library and levels 2 and 3 at Central Library. With the limited resources of the city's capital plan, the foundation is working to support us on this with the understanding that city investment will focus primarily on branch renewal and growth. Finally, it's a priority for the board that libraries reflect and celebrate Indigenous cultures and history. We look forward to working with Musqueam Nation on Marpole Branch and continuing to learn how to demonstrate VPL's priority on reconciliation in our spaces. As yet, funding solutions are still a work in progress to support the needs for branch maintenance and renovation and for the collections and equipment needed to open Oak Ridge in 2024. If the $4.5 million is unfunded for maintenance, we can expect more roof and pipe leaks and more temporarily closed spaces and non-functioning HVAC, as well as reduced accessibility. In addition, if these are unfunded, the planned work funded by the VPL Foundation is unlikely to proceed and further fundraising will be compromised. For branches, the capital plan is working with a branch size of 11,400 square feet for Marpole, compared to an identified need in the board facilities master plan of 17,000 based on projected growth, and this is a gap of 5,600 square feet with a cost of $8.5 million. For Joe Fortes, the capital plan is using a branch size of 14,500 with an identified need of 20,000, a gap of 5,500 square feet at a cost of $9.3 million. And it's notable that Joe Fortes' visits in 2019 exceed the annual visits at Oak Ridge, which will be a larger branch. So we can anticipate that Joe Fortes will be over capacity when it opens at the current plan size. We look forward to the work to come in the capital plan process that will seek to close some of these gaps.
Thank you, Christina. We now have Armin Amrulia, our Deputy City Manager and Acting GM of Real Estate and Facilities Management, to speak about our service yards. Thank you.
Thank you.
I got the wrong. Oh, I've got the. Oh, I've lost track. I'm sorry. Social facilities. We have Sandra Singh, our GM of Arts, Culture, and Community Services, to talk about social facilities. Sorry, Sandra.
No worries. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So I'm going to speak this afternoon, as Karen mentioned, on social facilities and equity-related investments. As Council may recall, you recently passed the city's first long-range social infrastructure strategy, Spaces to Thrive, and what you'll see in your package today is a reflection of the priorities and principles put forward through that strategy. You may recall that the vision for Spaces to Thrive is that all Vancouver residents access and enjoy the highest level of health and well-being possible through self-determined, equitable, and resilient social infrastructure spaces, programs, and networks. And this also reflects the work to advance community safety and well-being through social development and upstream investments. As a reminder, social facilities include a variety, and social infrastructure includes a variety of different types of facilities and spaces. There are city-owned facilities, our 3 social operations, Carnegie, Evelyn Saller, and Gathering Place. There are co-located facilities such as youth centers, senior centers that are nonprofit run, but in community centers. There's also Mountain View Cemetery, which is our city-run cemetery. There are also a number of NPO-operated spaces, either in city facilities or in their own facilities, about 400 social serving NPOs in this city, and about 50 of those are in city-owned spaces. And they reflect a wide range of services, serving a wide range of communities, from Indigenous healing and wellness centers, women's centers, cultural community centers, community-based health responses like OPSs, and other types of spaces. There are also neighborhood houses, which are a critical part of our city-owned our city social infrastructure ecosystem. 6 of them are on city-owned land, 5 are on non-city-owned land, and they are really critical multi-service hubs in communities that serve a diverse range of services and community members, many equity denied or lower income, and also food infrastructure and assets. So urban farms, food and medicine gardens, community gardens, community kitchens, and other types of spaces. As well, in the category for this capital plan is the Downtown Eastside Capital Grants Program, which is administered by PDS, and this is the program that enables the city to implement the directions in the Downtown Eastside Local Area Plan. And one thing I'd just like to flag is, as we look at social infrastructure, we do try to maximize value and efficiency through looking at co-located spaces, such as hubs, co-location in other community spaces, such as with libraries or community centers. In the last capital plan, we delivered a number of important projects and spaces through CACs and development contributions. In yellow, you will see in green, you will see the CAC developed or delivered contributions. So for example, the Clarny Senior Center. Also, the city directly invested in a number of spaces as well. These are in yellow. For example, we partnered with the Aboriginal Land Trust to find a permanent home for the Saoust Center. We undertook feasibility studies to advance critical work on projects such as Anya and the Downtown Eastside Indigenous Women's Healing Center. For the draft 2023-2026 capital plan, we have a number of projects that we're trying to advance in this plan in the current draft. There are 3 projects that are delivered in kind or anticipated to be delivered through in-kind CACs, 2 in the Cambie corridor and 1 in the West End. As well, we have tentatively allocated $5 million of city funding to support 2 neighborhood houses, just over $4 million to support the Cedar Cottage neighborhood house. This is a really important program for expansion and renewal program for the Cedar Cottage neighborhood house. They've been working on this since 2012, and they have $13.5 million already invested from senior government. They need a matching contribution from the city, and they're ready to go. They're just they have a gap, and they need some support from the city. As well, the Downtown Eastside Neighborhood House, another really important multi-service hub serving an important neighborhood in the city. Very modest investment here, just under $500,000 to aid them in doubling their space. There's $1.1 million for social capital grants to provide grants to nonprofits, relatively small grants to support renewals. And then there is allocated $4.3 million to support renovations and capital maintenance at the city's social operations. So that's Carnegie, Evelyn, Saller, and Gathering Place. Some of these are accessibility upgrades, as well as basic building maintenance, such as HVAC replacement, re-roofing. And then we have about $4 million currently allocated for planning and research to advance our various projects and to be ready for the next capital plan. And for the Downtown Eastside local area plan implementation, there is a proposed allocation of $4.5 million for PDS to continue to support the implementation of that plan. And you see in your slides the proposed breakdown and how that would be allocated. As with the library and park board, there are a number of unfunded elements that staff were hoping to advance over the next 4 years. We would like to move forward with the Powell CED Hub. This is an innovative approach to community economic development that sees diverse opportunities for community to become attached to employment and training opportunities, as well as creative and community gathering spaces. This also is a Vaha redevelopment site, and so not moving forward with that does impact our ability to activate that site for housing, longer-term housing. And we were also hoping to implement some solutions to street vending in the downtown east side in response to the vending study. And so not being able to move forward with that does impact the ongoing challenges in the downtown east side with street vending in the downtown east side street market. There are a number of equity and Indigenous projects that we would like to be in a position to contribute to over the next 4 years as they emerge. For example, renovations or expansion of the Vancouver Aboriginal Friendship Centre. MVAC, Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executive Committee, is about to complete their member facility assessment, and we understand that there will be some priorities emerging from that, as well as an Indigenous food hub, which has been flagged by the community as a priority. We would like to be able to bring some funding to advance some community cultural, at least one community cultural project in the next year, as well as support a gender equity project, either, for example, the Downtown Eastside Women's Center expansion. As Council knows, they serve over 700 at-risk women, and their demand has doubled over recent years. Or, for example, the GED Women's Sobering Center, which is an idea that has emerged from the work on MMIWG and UN Safe Spaces, which is coming to Council later this spring. There's nothing in the 4-year capital plan right now related to urban agriculture and food security. And as Council knows, food security is increasingly a challenge for many in our community. There were 3 projects or 3 priority areas in this category. We would like to support the development of a South Vancouver neighborhood house food center for distribution of food to low-income families. This was a gap that emerged during COVID, that as the food bank changed its approach. Yeah, you're right, you got it. Greenhouse infrastructure, which would be shared greenhouse infrastructure for various urban farmers, as well as being able to activate a number of sites that we anticipate coming through development. There's other maintenance associated with our social operations. And just to note, it's not clearly articulated here, but the Mountain View Cemetery, we need about $7 million to expand our interment capacity. That's an internal loan. It would be paid back through revenue generated once we have the capacity to make available to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I hope the pace is okay for council to trade off between filling a lot of information, the space of a lot of information, but not so quickly that you can't absorb it. So let us know if it's too fast, but we're trying to fit a lot in. I'm going to now speak about the archives. That's a little one-off. Our city archives, as you know, are housed in Vanier Park. You might not know that they reached capacity a few years ago in 2008, and we set up a satellite site in 2017 in East Vancouver. The archives store both our own city documents that we need to keep records of, as well as community archival collections. The satellite site serves as a temporary solution for the storage needs of the archives until a more permanent solution can be realized. And we are looking in the coming up capital plan to address capacity and maintenance needs. And we've come up with, before I actually talk about looking forward, I'll talk about what we achieved over the past 4 years. Quite a big project. We called it the Pre-Move project, but what it was really all about was fully inventorying all the things. I mean, the city of Vancouver is well over 100 years old. There's been a lot of collections added to those archives. We did a full inventory of the holdings, and we implemented a modern barcode tracking system. That was a lot of hands-on work. We also undertook some urgent upgrades at the satellite site, just archive stuff, climate control, quarantine freezers, things like that. In terms of the coming capital plan, we're looking to put about $5 million into, under $5 million, it looks like $4 million, into the archives. And really what you see on this slide is all about just creating capacity, kind of creative. By adding deeper shelves, we can increase capacity by 1/3, which allows us to accommodate, use that site until 2030 while we're figuring out what to do for a more permanent home. And start some long-term planning on the renewal replacement of the Vanier Park and satellite site to think about a longer-term permanent solution for the next capital plan cycle after this one. And then just some modest investments in the maintenance and operations of the satellite site to make sure that all the valuable things we have in there stay safe. So that's the archives. And with that, I will now introduce Armin Amriola, our Deputy City Manager and Acting GM of Real Estate, to talk about service yards. So there you go.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The service yards serve as a base operation for city staff and fleet, providing essential services to the community. I kind of look at it like the heartbeat of Vancouver. The service yards are key for civic resiliency and have an important role in disaster response. The 3 city departments that operate these service yards, engineering yards, are comprised of Manitoba, National, Inverness, and Kent yards. Parks, responsible for Stanley Park, Sunset, Jericho, Van Dusen, Queen Elizabeth, and Evans, and REFM for Evans. And we share that responsibility with Parks. Many of the Parks service yards are concentrated in industrial zoning in low-lying coastal areas that have the potential for floods and liquefaction. Key achievements over the past 4 years for these. It's a service yard equitable service facilities review. It's a lens, an equity lens, to look at commitment to the employment of equity, address workplace diversity and inclusion, reviewed existing washrooms, change rooms, and locker room facilities, renovation projects prioritized and ready for implementation, engineering service yards. The Manitoba Master Plan will be completed in Q2 of 2022 and plan to meet the current and future needs and will demonstrate leadership in sustainability and resiliency. The upgrades at Manitoba Yard were the relay of building of the CNG retrofits completed last fall in 2020, the fuel station upgrade and tank replacement and construction and scheduled for completion in Q4 of 2022, and the hydrovac garage design completed, tender on hold pending the funding. Park service yards, we finalized the Sunset Yard Master Plan. plan to reorganize the yard, replace obsolete facilities from the 1940s, and increase the efficiency and modernize. Initiated work at Sunset Yard on the first 2 phases of a 5-phase plan. The Sunset Caretaker House, I believe it's a heritage house, renovations scheduled for completion Q4 2022, and the Sunset Operations Building, new facilities, new staff facilities, and support base scheduled for Q4 of 2023. So in the draft preliminary 2023-2026 capital plan highlights, we're going to renovate 8 to 10 staff washrooms and change room facilities as prioritized across all yards to address issues with equity and accessibility per the Service Yard Equitable Facilities Review. And for Sunset Yard, we're going to complete the detailed design phase and review options for further phase delivery at the midterm update in 2024. The unfunded elements that we're going to be working with: the Sunset Yard renewal, phase 3 and 4, phase 3, construction of a new greenhouse facility, phase 4, demolition of the existing greenhouses and sheds, site work for fleet parking, upgrades to the energy plant, the risk of not proceeding, potential safety issues or disruption to services, the Manitoba Yard renewal, detailed design and construction of phase 1, potential service disruption and aging buildings with site infrastructure, the Manitoba Yard safety and business continuity renovations, sewers, trailers, salt shed, immediate needs must be addressed for safety and business continuity, Queen Elizabeth Park, temporary facilities to replace a fire-damaged service yard building, and the risk of not proceeding with this will be service disruption to park maintenance. And the Evans Yard, we want to expand the material storage and fleet parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. Okay, now we've come to a very big part of the plan, which is our city engineer, Lon Leclerc. And Lon is going to present, I think it's 5 separate categories. It's going to be vehicles and equipment, transportation and street use, One Water, solid waste, and renewable energy. That's going to take about a half hour. And also, Lon, if you'll just, delineate each one. I'm not going to jump up in between. You can do it. Thanks.
Yes, hello, Mayor and Council. So, the service categories that fall under the engineering department represent, I think it's about half of the capital plan. Starting with vehicles and equipment. So this group provides, engineering is a huge consumer of vehicles and equipment with 740 pieces or items. But what we do is we manage the fleet on behalf of all of the other departments, including Parks and Recreation, the police, and the fire departments. This group is responsible for procurement, maintenance, repairs, and fueling. In terms of the last 4 years, some significant accomplishments in this service category. We added 115 zero-emission vehicles. We piloted the first medium-duty electric refuse vehicle. You can see that pictured on the slide there, and secured contributions from senior governments for those projects. Reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 52%. A lot of that was achieved not through just the transition to electric vehicles, but also the change in the fuel type that we use. So a transition to renewable fuels, we have about 50% of all fuel is now renewable, and 80% of the diesel that we use in vehicles is renewable. Almost 500 vehicles were replaced, and that allowed us to improve the overall asset condition from 55 to 61% in the fair to good category. And what's important about that is, of course, anytime that equipment is not functioning or working, it hampers our ability to deliver services across the organization. So included in this capital plan is continued strengthening of that replacement. So 650 to 700 new assets to further increase the fleet to an even higher level of good to fair conditions. Separately from that, we look to right-size and optimize fleets. Sometimes we're using bigger vehicles than needed or bigger equipment than needed, and that's something we would be reviewing on a regular basis. In terms of the fleet electrification, we will be replacing 200 to 250 of our gas diesel assets with electric. And we will be focusing on, to do that, we'll be focusing on the market-ready technologies. And what I mean by that, there is a lot of equipment out there that doesn't have a zero emissions option, or the option that is available doesn't really work for our operations. To improve efficiency, we'll also be buying out some existing leases. And I just wanted to mention too, in this category, the fleets and programs that we have actually support the other groups. And so ultimately, when those needs are determined, we adjust our vehicles and equipment accordingly. Unfunded in this service group, there is still a lot that potentially could happen on the switch to low emissions or reduced emissions, but that would come at a significant cost premium, or in some cases, we don't see a solution there. And as I mentioned, this category has to be adjusted based on what the park board plans to do, what engineering plans to do, what happens in police, because we service the equipment for all those service areas. On to the streets service category. So this is probably the service category that has the highest visibility to the public. With over 1,400 kilometers of street, every business and every resident has a street that they face onto. And if you look at the long list of assets that sit on those streets on the right, under the photo there, there's a lot of work to maintain those assets in a state of good repair, and also work towards more resiliency in those networks. Also in this sort of service category, we're looking to improve mobility, and this is largely responding to growth, but also in climate change, which is to shift more of our trips to walk, bike, and transit, but also to create more safe and accessible network. A new area of focus for this service category is really supporting public life. And using the streets as a place for gathering and amenities to support public needs, business needs, climate emergency and equity goals. This is an area that's strongly emerging. And if you look at the achievements over the last 4 years, the COVID pandemic kind of really pointed that out for us. Again, similar to the park use, 16 temporary plazas are still ongoing. We have 13 temporary parklets. We piloted sidewalk and transit improvements on Robson Street, implemented a bike facility on Beach Avenue, implemented 40 kilometers of slow streets, and piloted 19 kilometers of bus lanes. So it was a lot that was very reactive and a lot that was actually directed by this council in this capital plan in response to the pandemic. In addition, we've also completed phase 1 of the Granville Bridge recoating rehabilitation. And by the end of this year, again, a keen direction of this council has been to get caught up on the backlog of requests for curb ramps. We basically are looking to eliminate the backlog of service requests from the public to put in curb ramps. Also, during the past 4 years, we did a lot of work that we'd also planned to do, including 20 kilometers of sidewalk and bikeway upgrades, including Richard Street, Harrow Street, Ontario, Smythe Street, 10th Avenue. And we also planned and designed the Granville Bridge connector. We also improved 22 kilometers of bus network. And on supporting public life, 3 new plazas, 800 Robson is already built and functioning as a plaza. Blood Alley Square and Butte Robson will be completed in 2022. Also this year, we'll be upgrading a number of plazas that are performing well into kind of an interim state in areas where they're been successful. And we continued the parking meter replacement program. So in the draft capital plan highlights, Big part of our work here is, again, on the renewal piece. Granville and Canby Bridge have significant renewal needs. And the proposed plan, or the draft plan that we have right now, does a good measure towards addressing that. But it is such a big need that it's something that really needs to be addressed over multiple capital plans moving forward. Also, Gastown Streets rehabilitation and improvements. We've been, in this plan, we have money set aside for that. It represents about 1/3 to a quarter of the actual need in that area, but it does make progress in that area. We continue with transportation safety accessibility targets, supporting the Broadway subway. Transit priority projects, here we're really leveraging the TransLink funding. For those transit priority projects, often TransLink is the majority funder or sometimes funding the entire cost, depending on the priority that it delivers to the transit service. Walking and cycling and transit improvements, we'll be implementing a number of these. These, again, would be using generally those temporary type of materials, not a full reconstruction of the street, but similar to what you see on Beach Avenue or Smythe Street. And we'll be doing minor upgrade. In the plan includes minor upgrades to gathering plazas and using temporary materials. So what's unfunded in the plan? We do see that if money was available, there would be more that we could do, certainly in Gastown on Water Street rehabilitation. We could take a bigger chunk of the full project. In terms of the active transportation neighborhood traffic calming, the amount that we have in the plan doesn't achieve the targets that we have for climate and safety and accessibility. That's a scalable one. As mentioned, it falls into that type of category. And in terms of the public gathering spaces and plazas, these are really in the BIA areas. We have about $8 million in the draft. That's over 4 years, and of course, that's responding to 22 BIAs. So as you can see, that could be generally, again, minor changes in multiple areas. So now I'm going to switch to the next service category, which is One Water. And One Water is the largest service category in engineering in terms of the capital plan. This service area is responsible for delivering clean, safe drinking water to businesses and residents across the city, providing the fire suppression system. But also they are responsible for improving the resilience of that system and responding to those climate change emergencies. This group also looks at, provides the sanitary drainage, rainwater management, flood protection, manages integrated watersheds for the 19 watersheds across the city. And again, in these areas, we look to kind of restore those ecosystem functions and improve those resilience. And most importantly, too, as been asked a couple of times, climate change risks and impacts, and kind of that's a big part of this group, but also addressing chronic pollution that exists today in the receiving waters. Significant accomplishments have actually been made again in this term, in your term on council. We ramped up renewal rates significantly. Water and sewer pipes are usually an asset that lasts about 100 years. During this capital plan, we increased the renewal rate for water pipes from 0.6% a year to 0.9% a year. That's terrific progress towards the target. And the sewer renewal rate increased from 0.3% to 0.5% a year. It's a ways off from the target, but still good progress. We're able to renew one of the pump stations. There's an image of it down in the bottom right, which is the Glennon 7th pump station, which actually also accommodated a public washroom as part of that. In this 4-year capital plan too, this group also supported growth by upgrading water and sewer mains as needed to support growth, but also providing those connections. A number of green rainwater management infrastructure assets are actually done through growth as well. And the team completed the integrated water management plans for both Canby Corridor and the Broadway plan area. Also, during the last 4 years, we've added 6 kilometers of additional hardened grid to our seismically resistant water mains. That's a significant improvement. Added 9 drinking fountains to improve access to water. Added another 4,200 residential water meters, increasing the coverage significantly. We're seeing reduced water consumption per capita, and we've improved the coastal flood protection with upgrades at 3 of the tidal gates. In addition to that, we completed the Rain City strategy and the Healthy Waters Plan. We finalized 1.2 kilometers of coastal flood protection in East Fraserlands. Constructed significant blue-green system pilots on Richard Street and Prince Edward Street in Sunset Park, and increased the amount of right-of-way that is managed into green water infrastructure by 54%. So that's going from 12 hectares up to 19 hectares. We've also established a drainage and sewer modeling and monitoring program to inform our investments moving forward, which is really going to help. In the capital plan, the draft capital plan that we're working on right now, we're looking to further increase the renewal rates. So for water, that would take us from 0.9% per year to 1.1% a year, which is very close to the target. Increase the sewer renewal rate from 0.6% a year to 0.8% a year. A lot more work to be done on sewer, but it's the funding for these service categories are within the sewer and water rates. We're also looking to renew and refurbish 4 pump stations and initiate the renewal or refurbishment of 3. And also in the capital plan highlights, we're looking to add another 5 kilometers to the seismically hardened water grid system. Add 20 new drinking fountains to increase access to drinking water. Further double the coverage of the residential water meters. And by implementing those, we hope to further reduce per capita water consumption. Continue to invest in green rainwater infrastructure. That will continue. Address combined sewer overflows through targeted investments. So a lot of our work right now on the Clean Waters Plan is identifying where we can target investments most strategically to reduce combined sewer overflows. And also implement blue-green systems on St. George Rainway, the Alberta Street, and the Columbia Park project. Unfunded elements in the plan include additional area for green water infrastructure treatment. So if we were to stick to the plan, it would be an additional 16 hectares. Complete the field reviews and improve the kind of the data that we have on our system. And just as a note, though, again here, for these unfunded elements to be addressed, these are funded through water and sewer rates. And so as we continue to scale those up, and we're practically scaling those up as quickly as we can. And as you know, for example, with the sewer rates, we actually have a number of big increases in the years ahead to address both the city's sewer system, but also our obligations to the region for major projects like the Iona treatment plant renewal. So the next service category that I'm going to cover is solid waste. So this service category is responsible for street cleaning, abandoned waste collection, and collection of organics and garbage. Again, this is an area that Council directed increases in. This area also manages the City of Vancouver landfill and the zero waste facility, which is located in Delta, and also the Vancouver South Transfer Station and the Zero Waste Center that's located in South Vancouver, and manages the gas recovery system. We have a diversion group in this service category too that looks to reduce waste. including single-use item strategy and other waste reduction efforts. Significant accomplishments in the last 4 years. Again, the pandemic, I think, highlighted a lot of the need for additional street cleaning and litter pickup in our city, and this council directed increases in those areas. We will be continuing to close portions of the landfill and convert the sorry, I'm on achievements. I got confused here. The accomplishments in this plan, we closed 15 hectares of landfill and converted and implemented a system to convert the landfill gas to natural gas. This is a project that's in partnership with Fortis BC. So we're inserting renewable natural gas into Fortis's network, which allows us to actually purchase it and also others to purchase renewable natural gas. We've also implemented a single-use item strategy, and this year we'll be launching the Love Food, Hate Waste campaign. Highlights of the capital plan that we have right now in the draft include 350 new high-volume recycling and litter containers. So these would be deployed across the city in the areas where we see the demand the greatest. You would recognize those areas as areas where the existing containers are generally overflowing. We would be looking to electrify more of the vehicles. The update of, we're using a lot more technology right now to be more strategic about how we run our routes. So using data and analysis would be updating our routes, dispatch and cart management systems, which actually have some potential big efficiencies. And in terms of the landfill, we're going to be designing 27 hectares for closure and actually close 14 hectares. We'll be expanding the landfill gas collection and in completing improvements to the transfer station. The diversion items are the ones that are generally not funded in the draft plan. So those include a new zero waste facility in the northern part of the city. So unfortunately, our two zero waste facilities are actually far from where our big concentration of our residents and businesses are, which are generally in the north part of the city. The diversion of challenging materials, the recovery of niche materials, the Zero Waste Demonstration Center, which is something that we had been pursuing with a number of entrepreneurs that are looking to trial and test new technologies to reduce, to better recover materials from waste and build resiliency. And another opportunity for us is actually we do have about 200,000 tons of soil and aggregate, which right now makes its way to landfill. But if we were to invest in equipment, we could recover a lot of that into reusable construction material and thereby reducing disposal costs. And then the final service category in the engineering services area is renewable energy. So this is our neighborhood energy utility, which provides low carbon heat and water to community buildings in Falls Creek and Mount Pleasant. It helps us achieve the targets that we set out in the Climate Emergency Action Plan, or generally our climate goals. During the past 4 years, again, significant progress in this area. We installed an additional 1.9 kilometers of distribution pipe, which connected 11 new buildings and over 1 million square feet of buildings to the system. We completed the peaking plant, and the peaking plant is a satellite energy center on Main Street, which allows us to really just meet that peak demand of the service hours. In the draft capital plan, we're looking at additional distribution expansion, connecting another 20 buildings, expanding to Northeast Falls Creek, commissioning another low carbon energy at our Falls Creek Energy Center, which is actually just a heat pump out of our sewer system, and install another peaking capacity at a temporary boiler plant. And we would be looking to progress our design to the next low carbon energy generation project, which would put us on target to decarbonize. This area, as you might know as well, is funded through the customers. So this is the money that pays for this system is paid for the people who use the energy. And so again, in terms of ability to move things in and out of categories, this is one of those ones that the money stays within it, and it funds all of those expansions. In this area, we do not have unfunded components. And that's it for me. Thanks.
So, like I said, we're ahead of schedule. I originally thought we would be kind of at 6 o'clock at this point. We have, I think, about a half hour left. We do. We've been throwing a lot of information at council. So, Mayor Mayor Stewart, I look to you to decide. We could go on for another half an hour. You could hear from a number of more categories, or we can stop for questions, or we can end early. I leave it to council to decide.
Thanks. I actually don't see anybody on the question list, so I'm just wondering if everybody's okay with it. We can just recess now and then continue on the next day. But I'll just wait for a second and see if anybody puts themselves on the question queue.
Mayor, I have a point of information, I guess.
Okay.
Can you just advise how many presentations we have left? I'm just trying to get a sense of how much of the time next time would be taken up by presentation versus if we heard it today and it would leave more time for discussion next week.
Yep, Deputy City Manager.
Yes, we have, whoops, sorry. We have 8 left. 3 of the presenters aren't here today, so we could go through 5 more, which would, I'm not even sure we could get through. Yeah, we could probably get through 4 or 5 more in the next half hour.
And if we left them, just follow up on that, then if we left them all to next week, we would end up using, it sounds like, quite a lot of the time on the presentations. Is that fair? 8 at 5 minutes?
That was our intention originally, was to do the rest that are remaining now next week. So it's built into our format, but we're flexible.
I'd be happy to hear at least another couple of the folks that are available so that to give staff or council will have more time to digest and present questions to staff ahead of time, and we can spend more time on discussion next week.
Okay, I'll just ask if anybody objects to that. I don't hear any objections, so let's just proceed till 6 as scheduled. I have Councillor Carr.
No, sorry. I support that, but the only
Oh.
question I was going to ask was who do we send questions to? I've been writing a list of questions.
Great.
You can send them to me.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's keep going then.
Okay, so next we have, is it Sandra or Ryan? No, it's Sandra Singh going to be presenting on affordable housing. IT is going to be next week.
Good afternoon again, Mayor and Council. So maybe I'll just skip past the technology. There we go. Okay, so just as a reminder, in terms of the non-market housing program, there are a number of different activities that attract capital spending or require capital investment. There is the CHIP program, the Community Housing Investment Program, in which we allocate city grants into nonprofit projects on nonprofit land to deepen affordability. And there's the deployment of turnkey housing delivered from private developers. As well, we deliver projects on city-owned lands, such as the RHI-funded projects, the permanent modular supportive housing, that's over 350 units, the temporary modular housing, deployment of other sites such as the Community Land Trust portfolio. We have about 30 projects upcoming or under development right now through this team. As well, we operate 12 buildings, over 1,000 units of low-income housing that need to be maintained. And while leases themselves are not capital, we do have building owner maintenance responsibilities in a number of leases that require some capital support. And as well, on the housing and homelessness services file, we work on supportive housing strategy implementation, as well as the emerging, as well as SRO strategy development and implementation, including our work with senior government that is emerging right now, as well as we deploy emergency shelters and permanent shelters. In terms of our key achievements over the last 4 years, there were many. This was a very busy portfolio. And so just a few of the highlights here on this slide for you. From an acquisition perspective and land deployment perspective, we deployed numerous city sites for housing with nonprofit partners, with hundreds completed during this plan and many more in the active pipeline. We deployed over 200 homes from turnkey housing. We rolled out 7 temporary modular housing buildings. We allocated 2 rounds of federal government RHI funding, including the purchase of 3 assets through this funding. We dedicated land for the permanent modular housing program. We took action on the region in Balmoral, and there were a number of other strategic initiatives. We also moved forward 3 co-location projects with RAFM, including Rod and Lodge, Cole Harbour, and Fire Hall number 5, and administered a number of capital grants, including $29 million in CHIP funding, 6.5 to enhance affordability on city land projects as part of that, and $8 million in RHI funding to unlock a nonprofit project. And lastly, we also invested in the preservation and replacement of housing stock, $1.3 million in SRO grants. We initiated an SRO strategy with senior government, and we have studies underway around the replacement of a number of our own operated assets. In terms of the draft, or the preliminary draft, 2023 to 2026 capital plan, there are a number of investments identified here. The projections that informed this preliminary draft are based on the current Housing Vancouver targets and the current work underway on the housing needs assessment, which will be further refined in the near future. Building off the activity in the current plan, we're proposing to increase capital for non-market housing in the next plan based on those projections. From an acquisition perspective, we're proposing to allocate funding for land acquisitions as we work through our existing land holdings and acquire sites to relocate temporary modular for the long term. We also anticipate the need for capital to hold properties until they're ready for construction, for example, demolishing existing buildings and addressing any land remediation issues for some of the sites. For low-income housing, we propose capital for replacing temporary shelters with permanent shelters, acquiring sites to further our emerging tri-level SRO strategy, which it'll be anticipated by senior government that we do bring some investment to the table, even as the junior level of government, and that we relocate our 220 terminal building to another temporary site as the lease on that comes to an end. For non-market capital, housing capital is needed to fund soft costs to get more sites shovel-ready for partner projects, to replace a city-owned building that's beyond its useful life and is in disrepair, and to expand the CHIP program to support housing delivery through the nonprofit sector. And of course, we require funding to maintain our existing housing in good repair for our own tenants. There are some unfunded elements, like with all of the other categories. There are a number of elements that are not addressed in the proposed plan at the moment. The budgeted capital maintenance falls short of what's needed to address deferred maintenance and maintain our buildings adequately. This unfunded element poses an increased risk of fire, flood, or other life safety events in our own buildings and may result in unplanned displacements, as we have seen over the last 4 years in our own portfolio. While the proposed acquisition budget is an increase from the current plan, it does not align with the 10-year forecast based on our current projections. And the proposed budget does not fund the housing component of the Marpole Civic Center redevelopment or dedicate funds for progressing the SRO investment strategy beyond the acquisition of 2 sites. We will be anticipated to contribute some staff effort over the 4 years to further developing and then administering that strategy. I can keep going? Okay, I will keep going. I'll move on to childcare next. So as council is aware, childcare is a significant area of delivery in terms of community infrastructure that supports economic participation and social participation of families and keeps Vancouver affordable for families. So in terms of in terms of the work that we do that requires capital in childcare, we deliver childcare on city land and in city buildings such as community centers and on partner land such as elementary and school sites. There's in-kind development. We work with PDS to facilitate childcare facilities delivered as part of the public benefit package and new developments and through CAC and DCL contributions. We support childcare projects on public and nonprofit-owned sites through grants. As with many of our strategies across the city, recognizing the systemic inequities experienced by people of Indigenous ancestry, we support Indigenous-led projects, including culturally safe school-age care off school grounds. We provide small capital assist grants to support partner-led renovations, and also capital funds the vast majority of the childcare team. In terms of key achievements during the last 4 years, as Council knows, we signed an MOU, the first ever, with the senior government to deliver and create new spaces. In terms of co-location with public and non-partners, that was a key strategy in the last capital plan. We anticipated significant site deployment from VSB to deliver childcare. That program was stalled, and so we were unable to advance as many of the VSB projects that we had hoped, but we were able to explore new models of childcare, such as outdoor-based childcare pilot and the seamless day pilot, in which children have childcare on site in the same classroom, preschool and then after school. We worked with community center associations to convert underutilized spaces in existing preschool rooms to address community need for full day childcare, and we co-located with housing projects and a healthcare work site, the Vancouver Native Housing site, as well as BC Housing and PHSA. We supported a new Indigenous childcare liaison role funded by the province but facilitated by us with MVAC, and supported the development of mixed-use projects. We have 2 council motions that direct our work right now, building a family-friendly Vancouver and childcare that works, and those are feeding directly into the draft childcare strategy, which also informed this submission and will be coming to council later this spring. In terms of the last capital plan, we had a total of approved 1,000 childcare spaces, and spaces that became operational were 531. And as council is aware, a childcare space may be approved, but it might take a few years for the project, especially a large complex capital project, to come into operations. In terms of the preliminary draft capital plan, we have a number of projects being proposed and categories here. There are 3 civic projects. On this slide, it says West End Civic Center, but it's maybe West End Civic Center or West End Aquatic Center, something out of the West End in terms of a childcare. Raycam Community Center renewal, as well as the Olympic Village School. We also have a really important opportunity to support a VAHA partnership project with the Urban Native Youth Association to provide childcare in the new project at the Anya site. We have some funding to support the conversion of preschool to full-day programs, a number of developer in-kind projects delivering about 314 spaces along the Central Canby corridor, a modest capital grant program to support non-city-owned sites. The plan is predicated with the move of childcare in the province from MCFD into Ministry of Education. One of the major assumptions in this plan, in this draft preliminary plan, is that the VSB is well positioned to take on the lion's share of delivering school-age care on their sites. However, there is still a need for some Indigenous-led, culturally safe school-age care off of school sites. And so we do propose a small amount of grant funding to support Indigenous partners to provide that care on their sites, as well as some capital maintenance. And as I mentioned, our planning, our feasibility studies, and our planning team. In terms of unfunded elements, again, like other capital asset categories, are unfunded elements, projects that we would like to advance or are emerging. The Cedar Cottage Neighborhood House, you heard that earlier, in the social infrastructure program. They have some significant senior government funding. They need some matching funds. There's an important opportunity to deliver some childcare in this high-need community. VAHA, co-location, and a number of other programs. As well, like a number of our asset categories, we have underfunded capital maintenance programs of our existing assets. And so some additional funding to bring those spaces to address their needs and make sure that they remain functional. And just a few considerations that I think Patrice spoke to earlier, but just to note that due to development, committed projects are generally in areas with high development potential, but those aren't necessarily the areas where there's equity needs or there's, so there's a disconnect between where the funding comes in from and where the actual need or the equity gaps are. We also need swing sites during redevelopment, and so there's just a number of considerations that, through childcare. Should I just keep? Should I keep going? Okay, all right. Okay, I'm on a roll. On to arts and culture. So this is, in this category, we have public art and cultural facilities. As council recall, your first long-range suite of strategies that you adopted in your term was Culture Shift, which included the overarching Culture Shift strategy, as well as Making Space for Arts and Culture, our infrastructure strategy, and the Vancouver Music Strategy, each of which had space implications and worked in tandem to provide an overarching policy framework that prioritizes self-determined Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh urban Indigenous spaces and public art, cultural heritage, equity, redress, and accessibility, renewal and enhancement of city-owned spaces, and increased partnerships with community, and trying to move toward community ownership through the development of a community-led cultural land trust. The capital program areas in this area are public art, the Chinatown transformation work that we're doing on this important heritage neighborhood, cultural spaces generally, and our own civic theaters that we operate. Key achievements during the last 4 years, we allocated some significant funding into grant funding to support Chinatown cultural partnerships, the investment of the city and the city's noting and prioritization of Chinatown as a key cultural district, and our MOU with the province also resulted in $28.5 million of new provincial museum funding landing in Chinatown with the purchase of the Wing Sang building for the deployment of the provincial museum hub, which was very exciting and announced not too long ago. 85 commissions in public art. It's a huge amount of public art deployed, just really, really exciting projects. There were, in the civic program, there was 4.2 million allocated. In the private sector program, 8.9 in kind. And 4 new cultural spaces have their shovels in the ground, about 37 million in kind. There's the 200-seat performance space at Oak Ridge and artist studios that are underway. We completed the 30 units of artist housing and production space at Main and 3rd. The 20,000 square foot cultural hub downtown is finished and underway, and there is the 6,000 square foot music production and rehearsal space underway. Council, on this slide, the stars indicate that the project is underway. As well, we allocated 160 cultural spaces infrastructure grants, about $6 million to plan, fix, expand, or buy cultural space. And this was leveraged by the community for a further $30 million. So a really, really important investment in community. As well, we, our own civic theaters undertook about $6.3 million in civic theater upgrades. That was about $800,000 in city investment, $4 million from the VCT Facilities Reserve, and then a $1.5 million federal grant. And all that work is either completed or substantially completed. In terms of the preliminary draft for 2023 to 2026, there are a number of projects in the proposed draft. There are 2 new in-kind cultural spaces being delivered, proposed to be delivered through development, 9 artist live-work studios in Cambie, and 14,000 square foot cultural hub at Burrard and Davie. There's $1 million allocated for work over the next 4 years to support Chinatown cultural partnerships and our ongoing work in Chinatown. There's $5 million in the Cultural Infrastructure Grants Program. This will provide approximately 130 grants, small to medium grants, to plan, research, fix, upgrade, both city-owned and non-city-owned spaces. And again, this funding does leverage then senior government funding, or it attracts that funding. About $16 million in cultural space capital maintenance to about 48 buildings that are generally 50% of which are in poor or very poor condition. There is a small 0.5, well, not small, significant but modest 0.4 million city contribution to the Joy Kagawa House renewal. This is a really, as you know, critical cultural space, and it has a partner contribution already of 1 million, and so that 0.4 is needed to make that project feasible. There's about $1 million in city funding for civic theater maintenance, renovations, and upgrades. We anticipate another $30 million from facility fees as the civic theaters come into full operations post-pandemic. There's some planning and implementation feasibility studies, and $17 million for public art, 16 from developer funding, and $1 million from the city, primarily to support the maintenance of our collection. Like other categories, there are a number of unfunded elements that staff were hoping to advance over the next 4 years. We do believe that the $1 million currently allocated for Chinatown is insufficient given the work that is needed in that community, and especially as we head into the the asset management and trying to preserve the important cultural, intangible and tangible heritage of that neighborhood. The Fire Hall Theatre had the feasibility study undertaken in the last capital plan. We would like to move forward with that. It's a very poor condition theatre, over 40 years old, not accessible, and significant issues there. The Cultural Spaces Fund, Council approved $10 million in 2019 to seed that fund that would help us start to work toward both the land trust and support investments in major projects. And so that 10 million we anticipate is leveraging about 50 million or attracting a further 50 million in other government and partnership funding. So it's a really good investment, and it's a way to support the community and community ownership. The cultural infrastructure grants is $1 million less than in the previous plan. Again, these are smaller grants to organizations, and they also help organizations attract senior government funding. Some of the spaces are our own that end up renewed out of this program. The Playhouse renovation and upgrades, there is demand for more accessible spaces. We can't get artists with disabilities onto the stage in a dignified way. In the Playhouse, we have some other functional issues, and so there are some renovations we would like to do there. We'd like to continue on the Vanier Park planning, and like with our other asset categories, there remains a capital maintenance gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. So we are down to our last presentation of today, and that's going to be, again, Armin Amarolia, our Deputy City Manager and Acting GM of Real Estate and Facilities Management, and she's going to talk about our Animal Services facility. Thanks, Armin. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. We're skipping some today, so let me just make it easy. Give me a sec. There we go.
Thank you again, Mayor and Council. We are presenting the Vancouver Animal Services project. It carries out the provisions of Vancouver Charter and Animal Control Bylaw and operates the Vancouver Animal Shelter Facility, focused on providing public safety from dangerous dogs and other animals, licensing and other related regulations. It focuses on animal care and adoption services and supports to encourage responsible pet ownership and the return of lost animals to their rightful owners. I've actually been the recipient of this myself. Public communication and outreach to attain a good quality of life for public and pets. Key achievements over the last 4 years for this project: site exploration on city-owned properties suitable for redevelopment and potential co-location opportunities with other city services. Council approved the acquisition of 1245 Glen Drive, located adjacent to the city's animal shelter, as a strategic future development site and for possible land assembly for future shelter rebuild. Functional program study for the shelter was carried out, including a test fit option for a standalone facility on the existing city site, and to explore a potential co-location with for the BC SPCA. And we have an MOU with the city and the BC SPCA, which is contemplated to explore some options. Maintained existing end-of-life animal shelter with minimal investment. So where we are now, explore the potential co-location of the Vancouver Animal Shelter with the SPCA Animal Campus in a redevelopment planned on their existing site with the following goals: more efficient partnerships for the delivery of capital project and ongoing operations. There's a lot of efficiencies in making this partnership. Higher quality animal care service, better equipped facility with easier and timely access to on-site veterinarian services and hospital. A streamlined and improved customer service by providing a one-stop stop type service to the public, supported by good public transit access and adequate parking, and the improved public safety through public education and community outreach opportunities, and of course, improved city staff and volunteer commuting options. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So when we reconvene this workshop on April 7th, Council's going to hear from police, fire, as well as our technology services, and that will be the end of these presentations. It's been a lot to listen to all of this, but it gives Council and the public listening a really good sense of just how much is in there and how complex it all is. And again, as Paul said earlier, the difficult trade-offs that need to eventually be made to land this plan. So with that, Mayor Stewart, we're done on our end. Is there anything else you need from staff today?
No, I think we're good. Thank you so much for staff team for putting all this together in such a digestible way for an enormous amount of information. Thanks to council for extending and but leaving us a little bit of time to enjoy this the sun. So with that, I think we can just ask for a motion to recess and reconvene.
Motion to recess.
Yeah, thank you. On April 7th at 3 p.m. Thanks, Councillor Hardwick. Seconder.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. All in favor, yay.
Yay.
Opposed, nay. Great. So we're recessed. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Good night.